Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Views of an Outsider, The Outsider's View from December 14th. If you want to keep up with everything that's going on in the world, but you don't want to drag down your entire life by listening to the news every day, then get the main stories right here once a week, and spend the rest of your time actually living your best life. Let's get right into it. This week, in an 8-3 vote, the vaccine panel for the CDC recommended that the hepatitis B shot should no longer be given to all babies immediately after birth, even if they are perfectly healthy and their mother tests negative, which was clearly an insane policy to begin with that benefited no one except the vaccine companies. The CDC panel now recommends that the hepatitis B vaccine should only be given at birth when the infant's mother tests positive for the virus, or if their status is unknown. This decision from the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices officially marks a major shift in the standard practices that have been blindly accepted for the last 3 decades in the United States. The panel also decided that some children do not actually need a 3rd dose of this vaccine, and recommended that each child's antibody levels be tested before determining if they need any follow-up doses, so that they are not over-vaccinated unnecessarily. On Friday, the president posted this: the CDC Vaccine Committee made a very good decision to end their hepatitis B vaccine recommendation for babies, the vast majority of whom are at no risk for hepatitis B, a disease that is mostly transmitted sexually or through dirty needles. Well, now all of the newborns that are shooting up in drug dens while having unprotected sex are in a lot of danger. And we're about to hear the often repeated phrase, people are going to die, as always. He went on, the American childhood vaccine schedule long required 72 jabs for perfectly healthy babies, far more than any other country in the world, and far more than is necessary. In fact, it is ridiculous. Many parents and scientists have been questioning the efficacy of the schedule, as have I. Trump then announced that he had signed a presidential memorandum directing the Department of Health and Human Services to fast-track a comprehensive evaluation of the vaccine schedule from other countries around the world to better align the U.S. vaccine schedule with the gold standard of science and common sense, adding, I am fully confident Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the CDC will get this done quickly and correctly for our nation's children. Thank you for your attention to this matter, Maha. And don't worry, if you want to stick it to Trump and RFK by sticking your baby 72 times, then I'm sure you will still be able to. And no doubt you will video it and post it online in the full expectation that those 2 men, who will actually never know you or your child, will somehow see it and cry themselves to sleep every night for the rest of their lives. The way your child will if you ruin their health and therefore life, all to make a political statement. Priorities. Sanity. Perspective. Let's embrace them instead of hissing at them like feral cats. And while at least I've not heard of anyone eating cats in this next story, the Somali welfare fraud scandal in Minnesota continued to draw more attention this week, because that scandal is now being linked to the Democrat leaders in that state. You'll recall that billions of tax dollars have been stolen in the state of Minnesota during their Democrat governor, Tim Walz's tenure. That's in addition to him being in charge during the largest COVID scam in the entire country. And who could forget BLM, brought to you by that state, the most expensive riots in our nation's history. I say we sue him for reimbursement. In the meantime, on top of all of that, as we have already discussed on previous weeks, City Journal reporting has uncovered that at least $1 billion dollars that was stolen in welfare and social services scams has been connected to the Somali community in Minnesota. And worst of all, some of this money was allegedly funneled to the Somalia-based terrorist group Al-Shabaab, who is linked to our old friends, Al-Qaeda. And our tax dollars have been funding this unforgivable BS. To top it all off, the Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller says that this welfare fraud scheme is far worse than the American people think it is, because it doesn't just involve the refugees that we generously took in, who then repaid our kindness by stealing vast amounts of our hard-earned money for themselves and for anti-American terrorists who want to kill us, the people who took them in. But according to Mr. Miller, it also involves complicit state government officials. And the total in stolen money is actually more than the initial estimates stated. On Fox News, Stephen Miller said, "We believe that the Somali fraud operation in Minnesota is the single greatest theft of taxpayer dollars through welfare fraud in American history. We believe we have only scratched the very top of the surface of how deep this goes. We believe the state government is fully complicit in this scheme, and we believe that what we are going to uncover is going to shock the American people." He also underscored the Somali ties to this fraud, connecting it to a larger conversation that this nation is having right now about immigration from third world countries with largely incompatible cultures, saying 75% of the Somali population, 3 out of every 4 in Minnesota, is on welfare. And that's likely a significant undercount of just how much of a financial burden the Somali refugee population is imposing on this country, warning that these fraudsters are engaging in massive fraud, lying and theft, and grift on a scale we've never seen before in American history. Meanwhile, reporting from the New York Post has tied the worst immigrant we ever decided to take in, Democrat Representative Ilhan Omar, to this scandal. In addition to bashing the country that took her in voluntarily, made her a millionaire, and elevated her to our Congress, where she openly says that she represents Somalia and its people, as opposed to the Americans, who are the only people on earth that are constitutionally entitled to representation in the Congress of the United States. And now, on top of all of those reasons to strip her of naturalization and send her and her brother back to the country that she loves so much, apparently, Miss Omar held political parties in one of the key restaurants that is named in this scam, and she personally knew one of its owners, who is now convicted of stealing millions of our tax dollars. No, I'm not done. On top of that, one of her own staffers has also been convicted of stealing millions too. And if you want more, Miss Omar even introduced the very bill that led to $250 million of this fraud. When asked about that on CNN last week, Miss Omar replied, "I just think that a lot of the COVID programs were set up so quickly that a lot of the guardrails did not get created." Whose job is it to create them? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's all she's got. That and calling you a racist for even asking. And America, evil for producing you and your Islamophobic bigotries. Good luck with that. So let's look at the other local politicians who are likewise under fire for their role in this theft. There have been well-deserved questions about Governor Walz's oversight, given how much fraud on so many fronts has gone on during his reign as governor. And remember, this was almost our vice president, ladies and gentlemen, and a glowing model of non-toxic masculinity for America's soy boys to imitate. Because that will take them so far in this world. Every woman I know can't stop saying how much she wants to jump 10 walls. No, wait a minute. Actually, there is no woman on the planet who has ever said that, except for that strange, crazy one who went on and on about how much she loved the smell of burning tires during the summer of BLM, and how she opened all the windows of the governor's mansion so that she could smell it all the more. But his wife's insanity is really a chicken or an egg question, and I'm not sure it's worth even asking. Regardless, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, announced that the Treasury Department is investigating this scandal, that under the feckless mismanagement of the Biden administration and Governor Tim Walz, hardworking Minnesotans' tax dollars may have been diverted to the terrorist organization Al-Shabaab. And the chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, James Comer of Kentucky, has announced a congressional investigation into all of this as well. I so wish that I could play the theme song to Bad Boys right now. What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you, bad boys, bad boys? But since I can't without getting a copyright strike, here's what Ben Shapiro had to say on the subject. It seems that the Somali welfare fraud scandal is now breaking into full view, and it's hitting a lot of people who are elected officials, including the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, and possibly Ilhan Omar. To understand why this matters so much, we have to understand that it is all tied to a couple of major national issues. One, of course, is mass migration from third world countries. Is that something America should be pursuing? The second is a gigantic, unaccountable welfare state in which billions of dollars can simply go missing, which takes years to uncover. The two stories are intertwined. When it comes to the question of mass migration, the Trump administration has taken an incredibly strong position that mass migration, particularly from countries that do not adhere to American values, should be significantly limited or curtailed. This is a very open question, implicated by not only the Afghan national, who shot 2 members of the National Guard, killing one, but also by this gigantic Somali welfare fraud case in Minnesota. As the Wall Street Journal points out, what happens when welfare becomes not a temporary hand up, but an ingrained expectation of American life? For an ugly glimpse, look at the astonishing fraud unfolding in Minnesota. Turns out, those GOP reformers were right to call out fraud in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The White House this week published a memo titled, "Yes, there's something wrong with Walz, and it costs taxpayers $1 billion, highlighting various swindles in the land of 10,000 lakes. There may be as many fraud schemes as lakes in the state, given the ease in which scammers tapped government funds. Some 86 individuals have been charged with defrauding Medicaid and the Federal Child Nutrition Program in Minnesota. Yes, literally stealing lunch money from kids. No one was doing anything about the red flags, one defendant's attorney told the New York Times. It was like someone was stealing money from the cookie jar, and they kept refilling it. One of those alleged schemes, the outfit Feeding Our Future, recruited individuals to set up a network of sham companies and sites that claimed to feed children in the pandemic. They then submitted false invoices and fake attendance rosters to the state. In fact, one of those rosters actually grabbed names from another website called listofrandomnames.com. And somehow, this worked for years. In another scheme, a 28-year-old woman allegedly launched a company, Smart Therapy, that claimed to provide one-on-one behavioral therapy to autistic children. She employed relatives with no formal education and recruited parents to enroll their non-autistic kids in her therapy sessions by paying them kickbacks of up to $1,500 a month per child. In a darkly comic twist, some parents allegedly extorted the woman by threatening to enroll their children in other autism centers if they weren't paid bigger kickbacks. Smart Therapy allegedly billed Medicaid for the kids' supposed therapy as well as their transportation to the appointments. It also submitted false claims for meals to the state's food programs. In another indictment, 8 individuals this fall were charged with fraudulently billing Medicaid to help recovering addicts find stable housing. Yes, housing. Minnesota pioneered the use of Medicaid money to help beneficiaries secure housing on the questionable rationale that this would improve their health and reduce health care spending. Democrats built this entire massive infrastructure, and now it turns out lots of people took advantage of it. And those people were, in this particular case, Somali. It's hilarious to watch members of the media try to create a rationale for why Somali immigrants to the United States overall have been a massive boon. In order for all of this to happen, you need complicit politicians, because when the fraud is this big, and so many people seem to know about it, it seems almost impossible not to have elected officials who knew about it. The New York Post reported U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar's close ties to the $1 billion welfare scam in her Minnesota congressional district are being uncovered. Omar held parties at one of the key restaurants named in the fraud, knew one of its now convicted owners, and one of her own staffers has also been convicted, both for stealing millions. Omar even introduced the bill that led to $250 million in fraud, yet she claims to have been completely unaware of it. Representative Omar knew who these people were. People she personally knew were making tens of millions of dollars in this program, claimed Bill Glahn, a policy fellow with the Minnesota-based Center of the American Experiment, to the Post. She had been inside the Safari facility on numerous occasions and couldn't put two and two together. Either she's terminally naive or knew and didn't care. Glahn added around $250 million was handed out by the Minnesota government to provide meals to school children during the pandemic from 2020 onward. Instead, it was pocketed by corrupt business owners, including Salam Ahmed Saeed. He's the co-owner of Safari Restaurant, where Omar held her 2018 congressional victory party. Saeed was found guilty in August of stealing over $12 million for serving 3.9 million phantom meals during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ben pointed out, this happened inside Omar's district. Her defense is, everybody who mentions this sort of stuff is racist. That is always and forever the defense. President Trump, of course, has been highly critical of the Somali American mass migration issue. Omar says Trump is an abusive, deranged old man. This woman, who once suggested that 9/11 was, quote, something some people did, and who herself wrote a letter to a judge asking that an ISIS recruiter be granted mercy because of the evils of having to integrate in America. She is now calling the president an abusive, deranged old man because he's been critical of Somali mass migration. Omar published a piece in the New York Times calling herself a victim, of course, because this is the way the left always tries to get out of this. If you know a bunch of people who engaged in tremendous welfare fraud, and they are big donors to you in your district, and you've made your career on pandering to that particular category of people, the best way out is to call everybody who notes it racist. Quote, all Americans have a duty to call out this hateful rhetoric when we hear it, she said. Listening to Omar lecture people about calling out hateful rhetoric is truly an amazing and astonishing thing. And I would just add to what Ben had to say on that by pointing out that deporting anyone who is connected to this fraud in any way would also remove a lot of the people who voted for Ms. Omar, meaning she'd have a hard time getting reelected. And once she is no longer an elected member of Congress, she could theoretically be stripped of her naturalized citizenship and floated back across the Pacific to the country that she says she loves so much and wants to live in again. I'm very much in favor of a two birds, one stone type of solution when I hear it. But from the collapse on parts of the left to rises on parts of the right, and don't worry, we're going to flip that later on, X has surged in popularity after the European Union announced last week that it had fined the social media platform $140 million for, quote, non-compliance with the rules and regulations in their heinous Digital Services Act. Elon Musk celebrated X's surging popularity and mocked the EU's attempts to punish free speech by posting rankings that show that ever since the EU announced its penalty against Musk's platform, X has become the most downloaded app across Europe. Posting last Sunday, X is seeing record-breaking downloads in many countries in Europe. The European Union is not a democracy, rule of the people, but rather a bureaucracy, rule of the unelected bureaucrats. X's head of product, Nikita Baer, accused the EU's censorship commission of hypocrisy because they exploited a bug in X's ad tool to extend the reach of the Commission's video announcing its penalty against X. Given their abuse of X's ad composer tool by deciding to use it to deceive users, Ms. Baer said that X has cut off the EU Commission's access to that tool, posting, "The irony of your announcement. You logged into your dormant ad account to take advantage of an exploit in our ad composer to post a link that deceives users into thinking it's a video to artificially increase its reach. As you may be aware, X believes everyone should have an equal voice on our platform. However, it seems you believe that the rules should not apply to your account. Your ad account has been terminated." Ms. Baer's response was reposted by Elon Musk. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, chimed in as well, saying the European Commission's $140 million fine isn't just an attack on X. It's an attack on all American tech platforms and the American people by foreign governments. The days of censoring Americans online are over. I have an idea. Europe has not invested sufficiently in its defenses. They rely heavily on the United States and the massive military that we pay for to bail them out if they should get in trouble. I think that before we send another dime to NATO or anything else regarding Europe's defenses, the defenses that keep them safe from their big bad neighbors, I think that the EU needs to sign documentation permanently forfeiting any form of censorship against Americans, American businesses, or American platforms. And if they choose not to sign that, as is their right, then we will choose to leave their asses out to dry, as is our right. How about that? Because I think that would work. And then we could all move on. And speaking of soon being able to move on, the Supreme Court will soon decide the fate of birthright citizenship going forward in this country in what could be a historic court case. On his first day back in office, President Trump signed an executive order declaring that children who were born in the United States to illegal immigrants and short-term visitors and tourists would no longer be magically transformed into American citizens. That order was immediately challenged in multiple lower federal courts, and so the order was put on hold while that was decided. But last Friday, there was some major news. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear the case and will decide whether our take on birthright citizenship is even constitutional. A ruling is expected by this summer. The case will hinge entirely on the highest court's interpretation of the 14th Amendment, which reads, and I quote, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States." Now, the reason that this clause is part of the 14th Amendment is because it was created to give citizenship to the children of slaves who had been denied their citizenship status because their parents were denied citizenship status as slaves. In the context of its creation, it was clearly never intended to grant citizenship to every pregnant tourist or illegal immigrant who broke into our country and had an anchor baby here We are literally the only country in the world who bases citizenship on this wild interpretation. No one else on the planet makes the children of random people that are passing through into citizens, and our forefathers would have unanimously voted such a ludicrous idea down in a heartbeat. Supporters of the wild interpretation of birthright citizenship say that the sentence that I just read from the 14th Amendment includes everyone born on U.S. soil under any circumstances, including babies born to illegal immigrants or tourists, both of which, I would point out, are citizens of other countries and are therefore not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. You've got to love our forefathers. They always put the words in there that were needed. And thus, they are not Americans under that amendment. And they are not, therefore, constitutionally entitled to free citizenship in our country. Essentially, the White House says that birthright citizenship was originally a very well-intentioned provision designed to extend citizenship to the children of former slaves after the Civil War, and it has long been abused by millions of illegal immigrants and even tourists who race across our border while they are pregnant to ensure that their children will get citizenship to a country that they have no rights or responsibilities to. Lawyers for the White House argue that Trump's executive order is not a change. It simply restores the original meaning of the citizenship clause, not to mention the sanity that every other nation on earth exercises when it comes to this particular subject, because citizenship is actually important. It determines the future and fate of your country because it hands out voting rights. It is not a participation trophy that you hand out to everyone to make them feel good. It matters. So this summer we will see just how far down the road to sanity the USA is. And speaking of a return to sanity, over the semi-popular mindset of everything should go, a new report from Concerned Women for America, CWA, officially confirms what many parents have long known about LGBT propaganda in children's programming. According to the study, 1/3 of all Netflix shows with ratings targeting children contain LGBTQ characters, themes, or messaging. And the younger that those children are, the more they seem to be targeting them, because that percentage jumps up to 41% in both TVG and TVY7 categories. In other words, the shows that are supposedly meant for the youngest viewers in our culture now routinely include content on sexual identities, a subject that would have been unthinkable in children's programming just 1 decade ago. And I'm talking about children who are so young that they still count their age on their fingers. Parents got a glimpse of all of this back in October when a clip from the series Dead End Paranormal Park went viral due to the main character coming out as transgender. Elon Musk amplified that video and urged users to cancel Netflix. Within hours, people were posting pics of their Netflix cancellations, and that streaming platform lost an estimated $15 billion in value. I was one of the people who canceled my subscription, just for full disclosure. But many others dismissed the situation as an isolated incident. Now, the CWA report has made it clear that this was actually just the tip of the iceberg. Their research team examined 326 Netflix series with TVG, TVY, or TVY7 ratings, all of which are categories that were meant to be entirely free of sexual topics altogether. The researchers then cataloged each program's LGBT themes in one of four ways: explicit, for openly identifying characters; implicit, for queer-coded characters or storylines; meta, for LGBT families on, say, reality shows; or none. Even among TVY shows, which are geared towards preschooler-aged toddlers, 21% of the programs, or more than 1 in 5, introduced LGBT concepts to toddlers. Trusted reboot shows, such as The Magic School Bus Rides Again and Strawberry Shortcake Berry in the Big City, feature explicitly transgender, non-binary, or transcoded characters. The president and CEO of CWA, Penny Knotts, who leads the nation's largest public policy organization for women, told the Daily Wire, "I think I was most surprised that they have even targeted preschool children. Over 20% of the programming aimed at the smallest viewers had LGBTQ themes included." For parents who thought that they could just trust age ratings to provide a safeguard against adult content, this report is a wake-up call. The era that we grew up in is over, and fringe activists are explicitly targeting your kids. As Ms. Knotts pointed out, back in the day when my children were young, sometimes you need a reprieve from your day. You just need a few minutes. And you feel safe. You've done the work as a mom. And yet, over all that content, at least 30% of it was LGBTQ themes. The bottom line is the rating systems do not work. You have the networks and the companies rating themselves. We have to go in a different direction because it's absolutely insidious what they're doing. Ms. Knotts also rejects the guilt trip narrative that major media companies use in order to say that their LGBT content in children's programming is just representation, as though there is even a legitimate reason why LGBTQ adults need to be represented to small children who are still so young that they are completely asexual. Well, I mean, of course, there is one reason, but it's a very perverted one. As Ms. Knotts stated, this is about deliberately moving the needle in culture. They've been very forthright in what they're planning to do. 3 words: Disney boardroom video. Then Ms. Knotts pointed out the obvious discrepancy between the LGBTQ representation on Netflix and the actual LGBTQ demographics in the population. You've got a very small percentage of the population, and yet the overall content that is being developed for little children is much larger than those numbers. Yet in May of this year, Netflix published a report highlighting their efforts to add even more diversity to their original content, bragging that 2023 was a standout year. Over half, 52.4% of all episodic programs released in the year featured LGBTQ plus characters as 10% or more of series regulars. What they were not as quick to publicize is that during that same year, roughly 60% of all new children's shows on Netflix also had LGBTQ content in that so-called form of entertainment. That is 6 times the rate one would expect if the goal were really simply to accurately mirror the population data. And their manipulation is working to the detriment of children. The spike in the number of young people who identify as LGBTQ not only has jumped dramatically higher than the fairly consistent numbers in other generations, but the timing of this inexplicable spike aligns with a spike in LGBTQ media content. Among Gen Z, LGBTQ self-identification has nearly doubled in just 5 years, jumping from 11% just in 2017 to more than 20% in 2023, as this new report notes. The report also reveals that a major inflection point occurred right around 2021, when LGBTQ representation suddenly spiked in children's shows. Ms. Knotts explained, remember, this is during COVID. Children are out of school, at home. I think there was absolute intent on the part of the culture warriors and content creators to try to target children. That spike in children's LGBTQ content also coincided with a dramatic rise in the number of minors who were suddenly identifying as transgender. When engaged parents voice concerns, they are often brushed off as overreacting or being hopelessly bigoted. But their instincts are correct, according to Ms. Knotts, who said parents are being gaslit. Anyone who's ever paid for an ad knows that children and adults both are impressionable. That's the point of ads. Just basic common sense tells you that people are impressionable, and children are even more impressionable. Parents are right to be on their guard. Unfortunately, Netflix has let them down, as has much of the industry. The truth is that Netflix and the broader entertainment industry have betrayed families, even at the cost of deeply confusing otherwise happy kids into permanently mutilating themselves. One of the more despicable findings in this report was how classic franchises with names that were familiar and trusted by parents, including the Magic School Bus, She-Ra, Power Rangers, and the Babysitters Club, were all rebooted to deliberately incorporate LGBTQ characters or themes for the very first time out of left field, inserting them behind parents' backs, masked by names that the parents already trusted and thought that they knew, rewriting beloved franchises in order to promote a biased pre-acceptance toward gender ideology and other left-wing cult doctrines. As Ms. Knotts pointed out, there is only one thing that parents who are unwilling to forfeit their kids can do, and that is to take a firm stand with streaming services that their children are not community property, and to back that stand up by refusing to give any hard-earned dollars to any platforms who refuse to respect that. Because if there is one thing that they care about more than their ideology, it is their bottom line. It is their pocketbooks. And the great thing about this issue is that parents have 100% of the control here. Because only parents have children. And only children watch children's content. If you do not let your child watch their content, they end up going bankrupt. And even though the activists would scream over a stand like that, there's nothing they can do to stop it. Because between all of them, they have maybe a handful of children, which is not enough to turn a profit. They want parents to feel powerless, so they are gaslighting you. But parents actually do have 100% of the power on this issue. And if you can't take that simple stand with as many options as there are out there these days for alternatives, then you really do forfeit the right to complain about how the world is going to hell in a handbasket. To be blunt, put up or shut up. Do something real or virtue signal elsewhere. And as for the streaming services that you do decide to keep, the days of just turning on any kids show and walking away are long behind us. You cannot trust the ratings or the supposed age of the intended audience to mean anything. Parents who care about their kids growing up into happy and healthy adults will have to be really serious about seeking out alternative media that aligns with their own values. Kirk Cameron is producing a very popular amount of children's content. So is BitKey. Then there's the retro stuff from your own childhood that's available in multiple places. There's tons of options of things as long as they're not getting bundled. Don't support a platform that mixes and matches and uses the good stuff to fund the damaging stuff. We need to support the people who are doing the work to create content that we can actually feel good about supporting. And we have to cut off the money to those content makers who push their preferred garbage down our throats, all because we've let them. But we have also shown that we can get their attention when we decide to mean business. One word: Budweiser. I canceled my Netflix subscription months ago because of what they are doing to kids, and I don't even have any children of my own. But I'm willing to do something real, even if it doesn't impact me directly, because I actually care about people's quality of life. And a lot of that starts in childhood. So, if you screw around with the well-being of vulnerable children, potentially impacting them and saddling them with struggles for years and years, potentially for the rest of their life, then as far as I'm concerned, you can go directly to hell without passing go or collecting $200. Let children be children. They are not the tug-of-war rope in the culture wars. And anyone who treats them like they are, is the enemy. We can disagree without being enemies. But if you treat innocent children like a means to an end, that is more than a disagreement. And speaking of people who are definitely my enemies, a new report by the civil rights watchdog group Stop Anti-Semitism found that anti-Semitism has become so widespread and so deeply entrenched across America's college campuses that many Jewish students are hiding their identities, reporting fear, harassment, and inadequate protection from the institutions that they are paying thousands of dollars in debt to attend. Based on incident data from 90 colleges combined with a survey, the civil rights group's annual report cards show that 39% of Jewish students have concealed their identities on campus. That is 2 out of every 5 Jews having to hide who they are. Not okay. While 62% of them say that they, as Americans living on the other side of the planet, where they are powerless young people barely out of high school, have been directly blamed for Israel's action in Gaza because of their race. We used to have a word for that, but it's been made meaningless, which is the problem with using words in that way. 58% of them also report personally experiencing anti-Semitic hatred, discrimination, and bigotry. And nearly 2/3 of the children of our Jewish neighbors feel unwelcome on parts of their own campuses amid escalating anti-Israel protests, campuses that we subsidize with our hard-earned money and should not do if that's the way they're going to behave. So what was the result of the data in this report, you might ask? 14 colleges received out-and-out failing grades, Fs, including Columbia University, the New School, Harvard, Yale, Brown, Penn, MIT, Northwestern, and UC Berkeley. Not a single surprise in that once respected list. And not a single school among them that I would spit on if it was accidentally burning down. According to the report, these institutions allowed a pervasive and sometimes violent environment to develop in an atmosphere that is marked by harassment, property vandalism, hateful slurs, and disruptions to learning due to aggressive protests. Columbia and the New School were specifically cited for federal findings of deliberate indifference towards their Jewish students. The founder of Stop Anti-Semitism, Leora Rez, argued that the worst offenders have become ground zero for anti-Semitism in higher education. But some institutions actually improved. So let's be positive here. Cornell rose from an F to a C for finally taking administrative action, while Vassar increased from a D to a B. Good for you. 15 schools out there earned A's. So let's note the good and not just the bad. Those schools included Baylor, Clemson, Elon, and Colorado State, which were all highlighted as examples of campuses that consistently enforce basic standards for human decency and proactively prevent anti-Semitism and decisively deal with it when it does occur. The disgraceful fallout from the refusal of many elite schools to protect their Jewish students, academia, or a campus where violence and crimes of vandalism and assault were not tolerated, finally forced federal intervention. In July, the Trump administration reached a high-profile settlement with Columbia, requiring the school to pay $200 million to the federal government and $20 million to Jewish employees in exchange for lifting the freezes on their federal funding and ending several investigations. But clearly, they have a very long way to go with an F, and they are still refusing to admit to wrongdoing, while acknowledging that they needed to address harmful incidents. You see, not addressing harmful incidents. What exactly is your definition of wrongdoing? Harvard likewise faced a federal civil rights finding in June. A letter from the Department of Health and Human Services concluded that Harvard violated Title VI by failing to stop discrimination, threats, and physical intimidation against Jewish and Israeli students. Investigators cited assaults, hate imagery like swastikas, demonstrations that violated the rules, and very lenient discipline towards these offenses. The administration warned Harvard that they could lose their federal funding unless they made swift reforms. Harvard disputed the findings, but acknowledged that anti-Semitism was a serious problem on their campus. Yeah, just go back a few seconds and repost my same response. And they proclaimed that they were committed to improving campus safety and inclusion. I would assume that the Ivy League still understands a failing grade when they see one. So, stop failing and buckle down. Rediscover what it means to achieve success, something that you used to excel at once upon a time. Stop Anti-Semitism urged all universities nationwide to emulate the highly rated institutions by condemning anti-Semitism unequivocally. That last word is the key. Enforcing clear policies the first word being the key, and ensuring transparent investigations into hate-based incidents. And speaking of elites that are spreading uneducated ignorance and anti-Semitic bigotry, for which they will be condemned by history for all time, because history has been very consistent about doing that. And they would have to be the very first exceptions for that not to be their fate, so the odds are not in their favor. At a gala in Washington, D.C., the Association and Club of Foreign Press Correspondents USA had the gall to put on a truly nauseating show that only today's out-of-touch establishment media would be immorally warped enough to even attempt to pull off, by elevating terrorists, known terrorists, that they tried to pass off as journalists. Al-Jazzera co-sponsored the event, at which the Qatari state outlet handed itself, via the other co-sponsor, the Club of Foreign Press Correspondents Press Freedom Grant. The evening was so lost in the moral fog that it has created for too long to see up from down anymore, that the organizers actually held a moment of silence for the 10 Al Jazeera reporters, in the world's largest air quotes, that were killed in Gaza. The Daily Wire reported that the photos of these 10 active terrorists were displayed on a memorial table in a deliberate echo of the empty seat tributes to the Israeli hostages that were kidnapped by Hamas, in a truly grotesque appropriation of genuine suffering. Then the Fox News correspondent, Trey Yingst, accepted an award and used his speech to commend, quote, fearless Palestinian journalists and to criticize Israel's restriction on Gaza's reporting, while having not even a single word of condemnation to utter about Hamas's routine censorship and intimidation, not to mention torture and gruesome murder of the Palestinian journalists that deviate from their prescribed propaganda. Instead, Yingst praised, quote, fearless and tenacious Palestinian journalists that toe the line. Yeah, the last few words I added, but the rest were his. Who supposedly don't have the luxury to leave. Those journalists, conveniently enough, were left unnamed by him, but they include operatives whose resumes read like counterterrorism dossiers. So let's take a look for ourselves at the heroes that the media honored, shall we? As Honest Reporting noted, Anas al-Sharif is not a reporter. He is the head of a Hamas rocket cell. He was photographed with senior Hamas leaders, and he openly praised the October 7th atrocities, which he described positively when he said that those barbarians were, quote, roaming the country, killing and capturing. Next, Ismail al-Ghul, appropriately named, a member of Hamas's Nukba forces, who trained operatives in how to best film their gruesome terror attacks. Yes, that was his great contribution to journalism, teaching terrorists the best camera angle to film themselves gang-raping teenagers and beheading wounded civilians that were trying to crawl away, and shooting family dogs, and cutting body parts off of babies in front of their parents. Do you want me to go on? That's a journalist, apparently. And it's so tragic that he's dead and burning in hell. Then there is Hossam Shabat, a Hamas sniper who was involved in attacks on both Israeli soldiers and civilians, who also fronted Al Jazeera's false gang rape story about Shifa Hospital, that has been unequivocally debunked. Next is Hamza al-Dada, a Palestinian officer for Islamic Jihad, who was in the middle of operating a hostile drone when he was killed as an active combatant participating in militant attacks, not a journalist, as was Mustafa Thuria, a Hamas deputy squad commander who was killed alongside al-Dada while participating in his own military activities, so also not killed as a journalist, but as a combatant. Then there is Mohammed Salama, an active participant who infiltrated Israel on October 7th and who filmed the massacre while chanting Allahu Akbar. Now, you are entitled to your own opinions, and they can be different from mine, but those are not journalists. They do not deserve to be memorialized with awards and a moment of silence. They don't even deserve graves. Vultures need something to eat. And I personally have way more compassion for vultures than I do for any of those animals. You are welcome to feel differently. I cannot pretend to understand you if you do, but I also do not deny that that is your right. As for my feelings, which is what a podcast is about, I can only speak to my feelings. As the Daily Wire pointed out, by memorializing terrorist operatives who used cameras as camouflage for jihad, the Foreign Press Correspondents Association turned a celebration of journalism into a moral black hole. This was not solidarity with fellow members of the press. It was the gaslighting that the media has become known for. It was the whitewashing of radical, crusading combatants and the elevation of violent militants that were unsuccessfully masquerading as reporters. And by clinging to this farce and perpetuating it, as though anyone is buying the slop that they're selling, the media just gave the ultimate performance of their one-hit wonder, the total abdication of integrity while dressing up that act of cowardice as a virtue. And it is no more convincing an address than Leah Thomas's. Rather than elevating actual brave truth-tellers, of which there are many in the world, people who risk their lives to tell stories, the press decided that their priority was to try to legitimize dead terrorists who had posed as reporters and who they simply could have left alone. And for that decision, may their shame live in infamy. Now let's move on to other parts of the Middle East. Apparently, last weekend, Egypt and Iran were selected to face each other in Seattle's Pride match during the 2026 World Cup. Because apparently nothing says LGBTQ pride like a pride match that features two countries that actually criminalize homosexuality. But irony, as ever, is completely lost on some people. So Seattle will host a match between Egypt and Iran on June 26th during the FIFA World Cup. This match is also being designated as the official Pride match of the global tournament, and it will occur during Seattle's Pride weekend. It should be noted that the Pride match is not affiliated or endorsed by FIFA. The fact that these two countries will be the participants of the Pride match seems like satire, considering the optics that you could not have picked two worse teams unless Hamas were to suddenly decide to forfeit kidnapping, gang rape, and beheading babies in favor of joining a sports team when they aren't throwing homosexuals from rooftops, that is. But the B did not write this one. Seattle did. Apparently, they are too busy getting their chaps ready for the parade to know that Egypt is a country where if someone is caught engaging in homosexual activity, they can be punished by up to 3 years in prison for it. And they may be forced to pay a hefty fine as well, according to Human Rights Watch, who also reports that in Iran, capital punishment remains the maximum penalty under the law for participating in homosexual acts. Qatar, another country that outlaws homosexuality, is also scheduled to play in Seattle for the 2026 World Cup. Qatar hosted the renowned soccer tournament in 2022, where European teams came under fire for pride-themed armbands. The bands ultimately were not worn during the matches after FIFA threatened to penalize the players for wearing the symbolic accessory during a match that they were being paid to play, not politicize. Seattle FWC 26, which is the local activist committee in Seattle that is injecting gay pride into the World Cup, calls their particular brand of inclusion Seattle's greatest strength, saying, "We have a rare opportunity to make a lasting impact, one that educates the world, inspires our LGBTQ plus community, and uplifts LGBTQ plus businesses and cultural organizations." Yeah, you're going to impact a lot of gay people back in the Middle East who will pay the price for this. And they will be lifted up by nooses hanging from cranes. Or you could just play the game, because as you've requested for years, we all want to stay out and very far away from your bedrooms. You are the ones who keep putting your bed on parade. Like the guy with the face tattoo, who got the face tattoo because he wants people to do a double take, and then he gets aggressive because they're looking at him, because he tattooed his face. Given that Seattle hosts one of the largest in-your-face pride celebrations in the country, there is no doubt that there will be a clash of cultures when Egypt, Iran, and Qatar come to town next June. But it may or may not even come to that, because President Trump said that, quote, "If we think there's going to be a sign of any trouble, I would ask Gianni, FA's President Gianni Infantino, to move that to a different city. We have a lot of cities that would love to have it number one, and will do it very safely. Both Egypt and Iran have since asked to be left out of the soccer match that is branded as a celebration of homosexuality, which of course has nothing to do with soccer, because they say that they do not want to participate in the LGBT celebration, which comes as a shock to no one on planet Earth, except apparently the people who somehow thought that this had even the slightest possibility of working to begin with. Now, for the sake of clarity, I want to just state that I do not support Iran or Egypt's beliefs, but I also do not support Seattle's belief that they have the right to force their religion onto other unwilling participants. If you want to hold a pride event in your city, fine. That is your right. I have nothing to say. But if you tell me that in order for me to enter a pie-eating contest, which has nothing to do with sex, although admittedly I've never eaten pie in Seattle, so maybe I'm assuming too much, but that in order for me to participate in that separate competition, I also have to participate in your sexual belief system, now we have a problem. Because your right to swing your fist through the air stops at my nose. That means that other people have rights too. And you do not have the right to force anyone to believe what you believe and participate in your religion. Religion is supposed to be voluntary, not forced. When it was forced, that was called the Spanish Inquisition. We frown on that, so stop doing that. In a letter sent to FIFA, the Egyptian Football Association requested that there be no activities glorifying homosexuality during their match with Iran. Egypt also referenced FIFA's policies requiring FIFA competitions to avoid anything that brings conflict between fans from different backgrounds, saying the Egyptian Federation categorically rejects these calls and demands that FIFA not hold any events or performances relating to supporting homosexuality inside the stadium on match day that directly contradict the cultural, religious, and social values in the region, especially in Arab and Islamic societies. Iran made a similar statement. A spokesperson for Seattle's FIFA World Cup committee, which is directly associated with the soccer tournament, told the BBC that their plans for that weekend focus on events around the city, not inside the stadium or during the soccer match. But that is a questionable claim, with the match itself being billed as a Pride match event. FIFA is likely to stand with these two teams based on its record, given that during the 2022 World Cup, as we already covered, FIFA threatened sanctions for European countries that wanted to wear Pride-themed LGBT bands at matches. And those countries ultimately decided against pushing it. Because real money coming out of your pocket always matters the most, as gets proven over and over. However, if Seattle proves to be an exception to that rule, then the match could very well be moved elsewhere. So Seattle is now deservedly caught between a rock and a hard place. If they publicly back down, they betray their base in the LGBTQ community. If they stand firm and try to force their belief system onto unwilling visitors, then at best they look like tyrannical bullies, and at worst, they lose the match and a lot of money. In other parts of the country, on Monday, Florida's Republican Governor, Ron DeSantis, followed the example of Governor Greg Abbott in Texas and signed an executive order designating the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR. I will not refer to them as CAIR because that has connotations that they do not deserve, and the Muslim Brotherhood as foreign terrorist organizations. The Florida order rightly declares that the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood is irreconcilable with foundational American principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it noted that this group has a long history of supporting violence and terrorist attacks in pursuit of a global Islamic caliphate, including political assassinations and attacks on civilians. It also noted that it was members of the Muslim Brotherhood that created Hamas back in 1987, which is already designated as a foreign terrorist organization in the United States, one that was responsible for killing 46 American citizens on October 7th, 2023. Florida's executive order then linked the Muslim Brotherhood to groups in the United States, stating that the Palestine Committee, a group that was created to raise financial and moral support for Hamas, that's its purpose, was the group that founded CAIR in 1994. It added that CAIR was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in the largest terror financing case in the history of America. And many of its associates have actually been convicted of providing or conspiring to provide material support to designated terrorist organizations. The order states, CAIR was founded by persons connected to the Muslim Brotherhood and was created, in the words of persons affiliated with CAIR, as an official U.S. cover representing the Islamic community to conceal ties to Islamic extremist groups. And I would add, this is me speaking at this point, that CAIR's leader is on the record admitting that CAIR exists to represent Sama to the American people, which is, of course, Hamas spelled backwards. It's not very clever, but no points for honesty either. The new order directs the Florida Highway Patrol to take all lawful measures to prevent any unlawful activities by these two designated groups, and it requires all executive and cabinet agencies to block any listed terror organization, which these two now are, along with many others, or any individual person that is known to have provided material support or resources to such an organization from receiving state contracts, state employment, state funding, or any other government benefits or privileges. Yes, we do get to decide what happens with our tax dollars. CAIR, which thinly veils what it really is by calling itself the nation's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization, did the only thing that they could do given their record, which was to call the order defamatory and unconstitutional and accuse Governor DeSantis of being Israel first. Yes, in their eyes, being crusading genocidal terrorists last is the same thing as being Israel first, which tells you everything you need to know about them and their morality or lack thereof. I mean, the sheer fact that they're trying to appeal to America First people, an Islamic extremist group who hates America, I'm not buying that. The group added that they plan to defeat Governor DeSantis' latest Israel First stunt in court, which might get interesting because last week Governor Abbott called on the Trump administration to strip CAIR of its tax-exempt status over its multiple ties to foreign terrorist organizations. He argued that federal investigators and court filings have identified CAIR as a direct subsidiary of the Muslim Brotherhood and as a front group for Hamas in the United States. He also cited a recent report that claims CAIR awarded multiple $1,000 cash grants to college students who disrupted classes and intimidated or harassed fellow students while celebrating Hamas's October 7th attack. Yes, a lot of these protesters are just paid rabble-rousers. Governor Abbott wrote, Americans have generous hearts, and federal law wisely creates incentives to donate to nonprofit organizations that promote the public good, meaning charities. But charity must not become a backdoor to sponsor terrorism, endanger Americans, and subvert our democracy. Amen to that. And if all you're going to do is scream, that's not fair, you know what? I don't care. Because preserving a free haven for people who do not want to live under an Islamist caliphate is more important than fair. And if fair means that we have to let them do what they want, then forget fairness. I'm not saying ignore law. I'm not saying do anything wrong, but you're going to have to come at me with more than just the vague accusation, that's not fair. Well, life's not fair. Maybe it's not fair that you don't get to funnel our tax dollars to terrorists, but even if that's true, you're not going to funnel our tax dollars to terrorists, so I guess it's just not going to be fair. Now, while this next group of activists were not representing terrorists, what they were representing is not much better, if it's better at all. Last Saturday, according to a Monday post by the Department of Homeland Security, administrators from a university in Minneapolis, surprise, surprise, actually tried to block ICE from arresting an illegal immigrant sex offender who was roaming around their campus. Federal immigration agents had located Jesus Saucedo Portillo as he was getting into his car at Augsburg University. As they began doing their job, the officers were immediately met by a school official and campus security who attempted to obstruct the arrest, which is, of course, illegal. That was when ICE officers explained to the school official that they had an actual warrant in this case, instructing them to arrest this particular person, Saucedo Portillo. But laughably, the university administrator actually naively told them that they couldn't enforce a legal warrant because that would be violating university policies, according to DHS. Yep, you heard that correctly. These out-of-touch educators thought that their local college was the equivalent to their private kingdom, where their random towny college policies were actual laws on a scale that trumped real-world federal law. DHS said our officers informed them that federal law supersedes any university policy, and that if campus security would not stop blocking the law enforcement vehicle from exiting, they would be obstructing justice. But apparently, this echo chamber hasn't had contact with the outside world since COVID started. So that school administrator continued to block the ICE vehicle by ordering campus security to stand in front of it. He wasn't going to get in front of the vehicle and commit obstruction. The little people who depend on their real jobs, which he can take away from them, were ordered to do that for him. Despite claims that ICE was able to use the minimum amount of force necessary to arrest Saucedo Portillo, according to Fox 9, school officials are now claiming that masked ICE agents showed up on campus and targeted an undergraduate student, as opposed to a sex offender. And while they were there, they also confronted other individuals outside of a dorm. And unable to quit while they were ahead, they went on to claim that the feds had pointed their weapons at students and school officials. When did the mushroom cloud appear on the horizon? Their spokesperson wrote, they aimed weapons at witnesses that included staff and students, while many more students watched from their windows. These tactics, with the implicit threat of violence, are unacceptable, dangerous, and profoundly disturbing. As an urban university, Augsburg has long-standing professional relationships with local law enforcement, and we are accustomed to partnering closely on public safety issues. What happened on December 6th was far outside the scope of our normal experience. Our focus in the wake of this traumatic incident is on the safety and well-being of our campus community. Now more than ever, our mission of education is critical to the healthy functioning of a free, democratic society. Now, I'm not saying that they are lying, but in today's day and age, with cameras everywhere, and that many young people as witnesses, I'd like to see a few videos of what happened. Wouldn't you? The police chief of Minneapolis, Brian O'Hara, said that his officers supposedly received at least 2 911 calls about people with guns on campus, because that doesn't sound staged. But conveniently enough, the feds were not even there when the police arrived. And despite witnessing nothing himself, admittedly so, the police chief felt that it was important to tell Fox 9 that they're really scared. Both the American citizens are afraid, as well as people who have simply lived here and been contributing to the community for many years. Yes, sex offenders contribute to the community, and American citizens are scared of being deported for illegally being in the country that they have legal citizenship in. He expects you to buy that. Don't disappoint him. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has deployed more than 100 ICE agents from all across the country to Minneapolis after news got out that dozens of Somali scammers in that sanctuary state have allegedly stolen billions of dollars in welfare funds, taking the money from people in real need and funneling the cash through fake nonprofits and shell companies back to Somalia and even to the Somali terrorist group Al-Shabaab. The numbers alone say that those in power could not have failed to notice the flashing red lights, which may explain a lot about the claims that those same people in power are making right now, because it would be a shame if outsiders came in and kicked over a few rocks and showed the world the underbelly of your so-called compassion. In response to the influx of federal agents, Minneapolis's Democrat Mayor Jacob Frey, who you will remember from BLM, signed an executive order preventing ICE from operating on city-owned parking lots, ramps, garages, and vacant lots, according to Fox 9. That's not going to be enough to keep all of the sewage that your city and your state have produced behind the dam now that people are looking your direction, sweetie. But other cities are receiving unwanted attention as well. The Charlotte City Council is being slammed for approving $3.4 million that could have been much better spent elsewhere on the people, to hire a PR company to clean up the blood-stained reputation of their public transportation system after 2 widely publicized stabbings took place, including one that ended fatally on Charlotte's train system and sparked a national conversation about the unsafe outcomes of rising crime due to lax prosecution in urban areas of our country, by which I mean blue areas. Urban areas are always blue areas, or almost always. And the high crime ones definitely are. Those statistics are recorded. Only one red city is in the top 20 of crime. All the other 19 are blue. Go look it up. On Tuesday, North Carolina's Republican Representative Mark Harris called out the pro-crime Democrats in Charlotte for spending millions in taxpayer cash on misleading ads rather than choosing to invest in real safety to prevent another tragedy like Irina Zarutska's brutal murder. No amount of marketing will cause us to forget Irina, he wrote. The local radio host, Nick Craig, also called out local leaders on Tuesday for using the funds on ads telling you everything is fine rather than fixing safety. The second stabbing occurred on a Charlotte train last Friday when, according to the Charlotte Observer, an illegal immigrant from Honduras, Oscar Gerardo Solorzano Garcia, allegedly stabbed a man using a large fixed-blade knife. Then it came out that Solorzano Garcia had been deported on 2 separate occasions before this attack, and he had a lengthy rap sheet for aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, destroying evidence, resisting arrest, using a false ID, along with convictions for robbery and illegal re-entry. Okay, we kicked you out twice, dude. I do not know how we can be more clear that we do not want you in our country, unless we decide to impose the death penalty if you come back again. And yeah, I am okay with that for repeat offenders. It's like a guy that will not quit coming at you on a date. Once you've been really clear and tried everything else, you have no choice but to knee him in the balls to make him stop. The stabbing that he carried out came only 4 months after the shockingly unprovoked murder of 23-year-old Irina Zurutska, a Ukrainian refugee who was actually grateful to be in our country, was here legally, and contributed while being here, until she was stabbed to death in the neck by a man with at least 14 prior arrests for offenses such as armed robbery and assault with a deadly weapon. DeCarlos Brown Jr. only served 5 years for the robbery and got off on time served probation or community service in most of his other cases. And with this record of perpetual criminal violence, they released him again after a mental breakdown in which he claimed that other people were controlling his brain on a recorded 911 call. After being released into the public to endanger them, which is completely unforgivable and indefensible, he stabbed Irina Zurutska repeatedly in the neck on video as she was commuting from her job as a contributing member of society at a local pizzeria. See the difference? Law-abiding, hard-working, contributing immigrant versus violent career criminal who only takes as he robs the entirely innocent victims around him of their safety and even their lives. Now, I will point out that you can feel sorry for both if you are so inclined, but you can only show sympathy to one, because it will be at the expense of the other, no matter which you choose. Sympathy for Irina and those like her demands unpleasant actions against her killer and those like him. Sympathy for the killer demands sacrificing more Irinas. And yes, you do have to choose. And yes, not choosing is still choosing. Welcome to the adult world. It is not easy, but you are still called on to act in a responsible way towards your community, especially if you want them to do the same for you. That is what we refer to as society and civilization. Now, some people could not even spell responsibility, much less demonstrate it, which brings us to our next story. Representative Hank Johnson of Georgia reverted to the talking points of Iranian terrorists during a recent interview by referring to the United States first as the, quote, world's #1 bully, and then as, and I quote again, the Great Satan. Representative Johnson, who first became a household name when he suggested that the Pacific island of Guam might tip over if we sent too much American military equipment there, made these new low IQ statements while speaking with the far-left host, Dean Obadallah. In that interview, Johnson told Obadallah that the United States was the quintessential playground bully, lording it over other countries that had less power simply because we can. Bah! Not because the world would descend into warring chaos otherwise, and not because we financially support most of these countries with our aid and routinely pull their asses out of the fire when their lack of a military leads to an invasion by the real bullies of the world, who certainly do not give away their assets in aid. Still, Gomer Pyle, without the likability, claimed that we are the world's #1 bully and we are using our immense, unrivaled power to rule over those who have less power. This sends a shocking message to the world that America is indeed the, what did they used to call it? The great hand of Satan or something like that? I mean, America under the Trump regime is demonstrating that that moniker is entirely accurate. That's what we've become in this country, the great Satan, end quote. You will probably recall that this same imbecile raised more than a few eyebrows during a congressional hearing about a military buildup on Guam when he suggested that the added weight of the military equipment could cause the island to capsize, as though islands are free-floating objects on the surface of the water, like boats, instead of land masses that rise up from the ocean floor in the same way the continents do, only smaller, dude. To quote what he said at the time, "My fear is that the whole island will become so overly populated that it will tip over and capsize," end quote. To which Admiral Robert Willard, who was serving as the head of the U.S. Pacific Fleet at the time, paused and actually managed to reply with a straight face by saying, "We don't anticipate that. Our nation's leaders, ladies and gentlemen, in the country that leads the world, standards, people. They are a beautiful thing. Embrace them. Congressional seats are not meant to be handed out as participation trophies to the special ed class. Some things actually matter. And I say that as someone who had a brother with Down syndrome that I dearly loved more than anyone else on the planet and buried when I was 9 years old. So unless you can say the same thing, I'd advise you to hold off on grabbing the tar, feathers, and pitchforks, because you aren't qualified to come after me because of that entirely true statement in which I referenced the special ed class. And speaking of not being sorry for the truth, on Tuesday, HHS took to X to unapologetically confirm that they had indeed changed the nameplate of the portrait plaque for the Biden-era health official to his legal birth name, Richard Levine, instead of his trans-identifying name, Rachel Levine. Ironically, this was a change which apparently took place during the Democrat-driven government shutdown Levine was upset about the change, telling NPR, "I'm not going to comment on this type of petty action." And he didn't. He immediately had a spokesperson respond for him by saying, "During the federal shutdown, the current leadership of the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health changed Admiral Levine's photo to remove her current legal name and use a prior name, adding that this was bigotry against her." HHS argued very clearly that the change was made in order to reflect their current mission to base everything they do on science at all times, saying, quote, "Our priority is ensuring that the information presented internally and externally by HHS reflects gold standard science. We remain committed to reversing harmful policies enacted by Levine and ensuring that biological reality guides our approach to public health." By contrast, during his tenure, Levine falsely claimed the title of being the first female 4-star officer, and he did that in an official HHS video. And he was big on supporting transgender so-called care for minors, which is often irreversible and damaging to children. But Levine, not only in his private life, as is his right, but also in his position as a public health official, which is not his right, prioritized feelings over the truth, and his preferred narrative over science. Now, you are entitled to feel however you feel about this story, and so am I. And those feelings can be different without either one of us being a bad person. So, does Levine being upset bother me? It does not make me happy in any way. But it also is not going to keep me up at nights, especially given that his minor upset is about a plaque that he technically never has to look at if he chooses not to. That's why I called it minor upset. It's minor for that reason. Do I think that his feelings should be prioritized over the truth, even in the scientific world? Absolutely not. I am someone who lives with serious health problems. I do not have the luxury of living in a world where a doctor is allowed to lie to me because that doctor has decided that it is a kindness to lie. Science is about the truth. Don't get me wrong, feelings do matter, but they do not get to dictate science. People who say that their feelings should actually dictate science, are actually advocating for religious control of science. The church got very upset in their feelings when Copernicus and Galileo noticed that the scientific evidence was that the Earth was not the center of the universe and everything did not orbit around it, as the religious people believed in their heart of hearts, even though that is nowhere in the Bible. Nevertheless, that is how they had interpreted the Bible, and it very much upset their feelings to be told that the Earth actually orbited the sun. But it did, and it was important that mankind know the truth and build on the truth, not continue to build on lies. So I am not happy when anyone is upset. I'm not going to revel in their upset, either publicly or personally. It's not fun to be upset. But that also cannot be the deciding factor when the fate of mankind or actual human lives are at stake. Science has to be 100% truthful. Levine is not a woman. He can absolutely call himself Rachel. I will call him Rachel. I will not call him her. I will not call him a woman. I will not say that he can get pregnant. I will not say that he has 2 X chromosomes and no Y chromosome. I will not do that as a person who values the truth and who knows the destructive danger of lies and building on them, because you build on everything. You are either going to build on lies or on the truth. Building on lies is dangerous. And like I said, as someone who depends on the medical system, I cannot afford the luxury belief that says that if I have cancer, my doctor can tell me that lollipops will cure it, because in his mind, that's kinder than telling me to go through chemo and radiation. Because as someone who has witnessed death, I can promise you it is not kind. And that advice will kill. That does not mean that I have to or do revel in Levine's hurt feelings. But I also do not have to let those feelings dictate something that is even more important. Now, you may feel even more strongly about his feelings than I do. It may be something that actually does keep you up at night, and that's okay. That doesn't make me right and you wrong. It also doesn't make you right and me wrong. But regardless of whether you are someone who is closer to me, in which his feelings are approaching a neutral matter, or someone who is much more personally involved with the idea of his feelings being hurt and bothered by that idea to a much greater degree than I am, no matter which of those 2 categories you fall into, the truth for both of us remains that, just like Levine, our feelings as one person, while they are important, are not as important as humanity at scale, the purity of science, the objective truth on which science is supposed to be based, and the influence of all of that on actual life and death in fields like medicine. But changes are afoot elsewhere as well, so we will move on. Miami was a Republican stronghold for nearly 30 years, until they lost the mayoral race by almost 20 points on Tuesday, when the Democrat candidate Elaine Higgins defeated the GOP challenger Emilio Gonzalez in a runoff election, winning 59% of the vote. The 61-year-old victor is the first Democrat to win the mayoral race in Miami since 1997, and the first woman that has ever been elected to lead that city. Mr. Gonzalez congratulated Ms. Higgins on Tuesday evening and wished her the best as she leads the city going forward. Ms. Higgins said that her victory was partly due to Miami residents being done with dehumanizing and cruel rhetoric against migrants, which may or may not have anything to do with why they voted the way that they did. Perhaps polling data will reveal more about the voters' mindset, but throughout the campaign, Ms. Higgins has been critical of Trump's crackdown on illegal immigration while promising a more affordable future. Democrats see Ms. Higgins' victory as a positive sign for their party, and they are not wrong. Mamdani winning in a deep blue city is a sign of nothing, except the fact that New York has decided to go so far left that it is committing public suicide. But for Miami to swing blue after all of this time is a sign that you better not dismiss. Now, what caused it is up for debate, and it is not necessarily the things that the left claims via projection. But something is there beyond America's pendulum swinging, and you better accurately bring that into focus if you want to survive. The Democrat National Committee Chair, Ken Martin, posted, "Mayor-elect Elaine Higgins's win is a testament to what we can accomplish when we organize and compete everywhere." Democrats have now flipped a seat that was in Republicans' hands for nearly 30 years. For the record, Democrats have an advantage of 8,000 more registered voters in Miami than Republicans do, and Miami also went to Kamala Harris rather than to Trump during the presidential election. But as a whole, the state of Florida has shifted dramatically to the right ever since they elected Ron DeSantis and began thriving under his governance. And the rightward trend extended beyond their popular governor. Trump defeated Harris by more than 13 points in that state. But the Democrat advantage in voters has never flipped Miami before. So either their base was highly motivated in a way that they usually aren't, the right's base is already growing typically complacent, or there are red flag issues that are flipping voters. Regardless, if left unaddressed, this danger is bigger than just the midterms next fall, when the ruling party usually loses significant ground. If warning signs in the culture are not monitored closely and dealt with effectively, not by telling voters that they are wrong to feel the way that they feel, or that things are great when they are struggling financially, even though, yes, a lot of that is Biden's fault. He created record inflation, but the tariffs are not helping either. And if you do not deal with these issues effectively, as in deal with them in ways that work, you will lose Congress and the White House in 2028, and that will be catastrophic. People did not like being dismissed about trans stuff in sports, in bathrooms, and in their kids' classrooms, along with being dismissed and gaslit about the border and DEI and inflation, etc. But I have news for you. They are not going to tolerate the right dismissing them on other issues either. You either have to fix them and succeed, or you have to explain convincingly why it is going to take time and convince them to hang in there based on the admission that it may get worse before it gets better, but they have to believe you that it will get better. Gaslighting, dismissing, and most of all ignoring is suicide, no matter which party does it. And speaking of various forms of murder, an Ohio surgeon has been accused of forcing a patient that he impregnated to take an illegally obtained abortion pill through which he was successfully able to kill her unborn child against her will. Dr. Hassan James Abbas. I am past pretending to be surprised when people behave in the way that their culture raised them to behave and teaches them to behave. Dr. Abbas was charged last week after investigators said that he ordered an abortion pill using his estranged wife's information and then made his girlfriend swallow the pill against her will. Which is exactly why these pills should not be available online for any abusive boyfriend to easily get his hands on. If they are going to be available at all, they should only be available through a doctor who administers them directly to the patient and safely monitors the patient for the incredibly high likelihood of complications so that she does not bleed out in a bathroom somewhere. Why can we at least not agree on that? I mean, we can debate if they should be allowed at all, but we should be able to at least agree on that. Especially if we all want to claim that we all care about people. Abbas had his medical license suspended last month, and he was indicted on December 4th over his abuse in this case. He was charged with abduction, tampering with evidence, disrupting public services, unlawful distribution of an abortion-inducing drug, identity fraud, and deception to obtain a dangerous drug. An investigation from the State Medical Board of Ohio found that Abbas separated from his wife in October of 2024. Monitor froze. And began having a sexual relationship with one of his patients, which is, of course, not allowed, as well as entirely unethical. That patient then told Abbas on December 7th, 2024, that she was pregnant. Apparently, he told her that he wanted her to get an abortion, but she told him that she did not want an abortion. The next day, according to state officials, Abbas ordered mifepristone and misoprostol from an out-of-state telemedical abortion provider. According to the medical board, Abbas used his estranged wife's name, date of birth, and driver's license number to have the pills shipped to his home. 10 days later, Abbas allegedly tried to force his patient and the mother of his unborn child to take the pills. Officials say that on December 8th, patient 1 woke up at 4 a.m. and saw that you were awake. She fell back asleep and then awoke to you physically on top of her. She thought it was a hug, but then, holding her down, you took your fingers and forced a crushed powder inside her bottom lip beside her gums. You continued to hold patient 1 down. She fought to get away and ran to the kitchen, where she called 911. You took her phone and hung up the 911 call. The victim then drove to the hospital, where she reported the way that she and her child had been abused, and her diagnosis was reported as vaginal bleeding. Her baby did not survive. After a pregnant woman takes mifepristone, just for the record, the unborn child is cut off from the nutrients that it needs to survive, and it starves to death. Mifepristol, or misoprostol, sorry, I can't talk today, is then taken to induce labor and expel the now dead baby from its mother. During an interview with state officials, Abbas admitted to ordering the pills that were supposedly ordered by his wife, but he claimed that his victim had agreed to take them, according to the State Medical Board of Ohio. Who believes him? Yeah, me neither. And if that was true, why the ordering fraud? Why didn't she order them for herself under her name, instead of having you commit a fraud crime for no reason, if she voluntarily wanted to take them? As a result of the suspension of his medical license, Abbas was placed on administrative leave at the University of Toledo, where he was a surgical resident. Yeah, this is somebody I trust to operate on me. The horrific story is just one drop in the broader picture that is going on right now. In recent years, Biden severely relaxed the safety regulations and restrictions on mail-ordered abortion pills. And medication abortions have become the #1 type of abortion, while also opening the door to increased dangers for users by bypassing a doctor's supervision when it comes to a prescription-controlled substance and creating all kinds of new opportunities for abusers. Pro-life advocates have long warned about the easy availability of the abortion pill and the dangers of the lax mail order regulations. A Daily Wire investigation found that the pills were being shipped by shady online activist groups into states like Tennessee with no age verification or prescriptions being required before they ship these dangerous drugs. Despite all of the evidence on the frequency of serious side effects, the FDA seems to be slow-walking a formal review of microstones' safety or lack thereof. On Tuesday, the White House argued that medical reviews take time, which they have had. It's been almost a year since you were in office. And self-serving agendas are being questioned as interfering with transparent and honest data, given that in October of this year, despite them supposedly looking into whether or not these drugs were safe as we speak, meaning that that is an issue that is questionable, the FDA quietly approved a new generic version of microstone that is made by Aveda Solutions. And while the rich make more money and the politicians welsh on promises of transparency, and that they only care about the science, no matter what it shows, scared teenagers can be scammed online and end up bleeding out in a bathroom somewhere, and abusers can traumatize a woman by killing the child inside of her against her will. So the only question is, do we care about those people or not? Then on Thursday, a former Planned Parenthood director came out and admitted that women who had delivered fully formed babies after taking abortion pills are being instructed to flush them down the toilet by advocates of abortion to get rid of the evidence. Mayra Rodriguez revealed the horrific reality of the abortion pill in new video testimony that was released by the group Stop Coerced Abortions. In the video, Ms. Rodriguez discussed her experience at handling phone calls from women who took abortion pills at Planned Parenthood. She worked for Planned Parenthood, saying, "The phone calls that strike me the most were the clients with the abortion pills that will call me in the middle of the night and said, 'So you guys told me to push a blood clot on the toilet, and I tried to do that, but I didn't make it. And it's not a blood clot. It's actually a baby. So what do I do?' You're instructed to tell them to go ahead and grab it and throw it in the toilet and flush, and don't look." She said the client would respond by saying, "But you told me it was just a blood clot. But I can actually see the hands, the feet, the face, and they will be crying," end quote. Abortion advocates want to talk about the trauma of an unwanted pregnancy, but they do not want to talk about the trauma that they regularly cause to women by being entirely dishonest with them. Whether or not abortion should be allowed under completely honest circumstances is a separate debate. But I don't understand anybody that's advocating they should be able to lie to women about the decision that they're making. Ms. Rodriguez is different. And she wants women to be informed before they make a choice that they will have to live with. She discussed how in many states today, abortion pills are handed out without any idea how far along the pregnancy is, and how sometimes women would be unknowingly given the pill in their drinks. She said that abortion pills were the real back alley abortions that were actually taking place in today's world. Other harrowing testimony in the video included Ms. Rodriguez saying that Planned Parenthood workers were told to not investigate signs of human trafficking. So, if some abuser brings a woman in and they suspect that's actually her pimp and she's being trafficked and he's forcing her to get an abortion, they are supposed to help him do it and not help that woman. That's what they're instructed. She also said that a baby who survived an abortion was taken into a room that was designated for, and I quote, products of conception, where that living baby was left to die. She also recounted looking through trash bins for the discarded heads of babies who had been dismembered in surgical abortion procedures. Because that's what they do in surgical abortion procedures. I won't get more graphic than that, although I could. After experiences like these, she said, you understand that what you've been selling has never been freedom. Not for the mother and not for the child. What you have been selling is pain and darkness. And it's bloody. And it's all about money. In realizing that for 17 years, I helped no one. I helped no one, but I destroyed many. I would encourage you to check out the new documentary on Planned Parenthood's founder, Margaret Sanger. It delves into that agency's mission in the words of its own founder, whose writings clearly state that she created this agency, Planned Parenthood, for population control among black communities to target them and other undesirable minorities, which explains why she showed the Nazis, I'm not using that word figuratively, I mean the actual Nazis, how to carry out forced abortions in concentration camps. And why Planned Parenthood has so many locations in impoverished black communities and very few of them in white suburbia. That documentary is called The 1916 Project, if you're interested. There's a book by the same name on which it's based. The video of Ms. Rodriguez, speaking about her experiences inside the abortion industry, is part of a new series on the coercion that is allowed to go on in abortions. Ms. Rodriguez, who worked for Planned Parenthood for 17 years, she is not a pro-lifer, is currently a witness in a lawsuit against the abortion giant, as well as Minnesota's governor, Tim Walz. That lawsuit accuses that state of coercing women into having abortions and says that Minnesota's abortion laws violate the 14th Amendment rights of mothers and the equal protection rights of their unborn children. The founder of Live Action, Lila Rose, told the Daily Wire, "We must continue to listen to and share these horrific stories so that people know the truth. Life in the womb is precious, and abortion coercion is real. Every day we do not abolish abortion, preborn children are murdered, and mothers suffer through unimaginable physical and emotional trauma. Then there is the added trauma for women who are not only tricked via gross dishonesty into doing something that they would not otherwise do, but the ones who are physically forced by abusers to take the pills that then murder the baby that they are carrying inside of them," prompting Senator Josh Hawley, to send a letter to the Food and Drug Administrator, Marty McCary, on Wednesday, asking him directly about the reports that he is slow-walking the study on the dangers of the abortion pill. The founder of Live Action, Lila Rose, told the Daily Wire the FDA must act to protect children and mothers. By neglecting to review the dangerous drug mifepristone, Dr. McCary is dismissing the reality that abortion pills kill preborn children and endanger women. We must end mail-order abortion and ban the abortion pill now. Now, you might disagree with some of that. That doesn't mean you should dismiss all of it. President Trump told the Daily Wire on Wednesday that he was looking into these reports, saying, "I'll find out. I don't think they're slow-walking anything, but I'll find out." You better, Mr. President. Because everything that I said about lies in the field of medicine a few minutes ago applies to both sides of the aisle. And speaking of unapologetically having no loyalty to any party or side when they are wrong. On Wednesday, Bloomberg reported that the United States seized an oil tanker off of the coast of Venezuela. President Trump confirmed the news during a roundtable discussion that afternoon after he was asked about reports of the seizure by the Daily Wire's White House correspondent, Mary Margaret Holohan. Trump claimed that the tanker was taken by the United States, quote, "for very good reasons." I'm going to need to hear what those reasons are. Because I am all for blowing up cartels that are on their way to bring incredibly lethal drugs into our country to kill my neighbor's kids. But you cannot just decide to use our military to steal another country's oil because you don't like the scumbag drug lord that is the dictator of that country. And that's what it looks like to me that you just did. And I am not okay with that. So if I am wrong about what you just did, you better do more than tell me that there are good reasons for it. You better tell me what those reasons are. And they better be really, really good reasons. I'm going to be clear here. When the Democrats say that you should not stop the cartels. No, let the cartels bring in drugs into our country. They're nuts. Blow the cartels to hell and back. It's fine by me. Maduro falls from power. As long as we don't have to go to war to make it happen, yippee-yi-yo-ki-yay. They're selling that oil to our enemies. Blockade them. But tell me that we are now just going to randomly steal legitimate goods from people that we don't like. And speaking as an independent that has voted against you before, I will so do it again. Not out of a love for Maduro. I have none. This is about the principle of where it goes from here. The Venezuelan socialist government accused the United States of committing blatant theft and international piracy. Earlier on Wednesday, according to The Guardian, Maduro spoke at a rally and told Venezuelans to be prepared to act like warriors and smash the teeth of the North American empire if necessary. Oh, I'd like to see you try, you parasitic third world Napoleon complex. Where exactly is your nuclear arsenal? Oh, that's right. You don't have the bomb. So go ahead and kick our teeth and find out what happens, little man. FAFO. You know, I'm not going to put up with BS from either side or a dick measuring contest by a eunuch. And since I'm already irritated, I might as well get all of the blood pressure raising stories over all at once. As you are probably aware, despite Charlie Kirk's killer being arrested after admitting to his furry trans boyfriend, his family and his internet community in 3 separate confessions that he was the one who shot Charlie Kirk, despite his own family being the ones to recognize that he was the killer and turn him in, despite him making no claims at any time that he is not the killer or that he is a patsy, despite no shadowy organization killing or even trying to kill him or his family like Oswald, despite a whole variety of DNA evidence that backs up his own confessions that he is the killer, despite reports from people who knew him saying that he was an extremely angry person who actually walked around all the time with tightly clenched fists, an assertion that is supported by photographic evidence, despite his clear motives as a gay man who was in love with a trans furry and had been highly radicalized online, where he hung out in highly radicalized groups. And despite the truly sick, no exaggeration here, silence of the lamb's smile on his face this week in court that tells you that you are looking into the face of pure evil, despite all of that, conspiracy theories have continued to swirl. Conspiracies that have none of that evidence behind them, which accuse foreign governments, our government, Israel, of course, Turning Point USA, and even Charlie Kirk's widow of actually being the killer. And now this week, the CEO of Turning Point USA, Erica Kirk, has reached her breaking point over all of these dumb online conspiracy theories that are circulating more and more wildly and less logically about the assassination of her husband. On Wednesday, she torched the money-grubbing creators and pushers of these stupid conspiracy theories in an appearance on Fox News, where she was promoting her late husband's final posthumous book, Stop in the Name of God. She openly addressed the groundless rumors about herself, her friends, and her organization, saying that empty hypothesizing has led to an avalanche of real-life death threats and harassment, saying, call me what you want. Go down that rabbit hole, whatever. But when you go after my family, my Turning Point USA family, my Charlie Kirk Show family, when you go after the people that I love, and you're making hundreds and thousands of dollars every single episode going after the people that I love, because somehow they're in on this, no. This is righteous anger, because this is not okay. It's not healthy. This is a mind virus. Ever since Charlie Kirk was assassinated at a college event in Utah in September, his widow and Turning Point USA have been at the center of very low IQ conspiracy theories, despite the fact that his killer has been caught and is about to be tried. Yet in the name of making money, and yes, that is what this is all about, in the name of making money off of the still settling gravestone of someone that they claim to have cared about as a friend, these conspiracists, and I'm talking about the people who are making the conspiracy theories right now, not the people who bought them, have heaped suspicion on a number of Charlie's closest loved ones and family members, including his grieving wife, Erica, the only parent that his 2 toddlers have left, thereby putting her in the crosshairs, for which I'm sure he would be real grateful to you. Erica said that even her jewelry, which she has now dubbed the conspiracy collection, has become the topic of debate. despite the suspicion that snake oil salesmen have cast her way, and at Charlie's life's work, Turning Point USA. Erica says that she, the woman who forgave her husband's actual killer, also has compassion for the people who latch on to these conspiracies when they hear them, saying, you know what I thought? I thought, these people are human. We're all grieving in our own way. And they are trying to find the answer to something that happened that was so evil. They're trying so hard, and I get that. We are doing the same. So even though you're grieving in some pretty weird ways, she acknowledges that not all people grieve the same, something that unfortunately is not being extended to her. But she added that the conspiracies and the scrutiny have become too much for many of the people at Turning Point, saying, my team are not machines, and they are not robots. They are human. We have more death threats on our team and our side than I have ever seen. I have kidnapping threats. You name it, we have it. And my poor team is exhausted. Every time they bring this back up, what are we supposed to do? Relive that trauma all over again? They watched my husband get murdered. And when she's talking about the people bringing them up, she's talking about the creators and pushers who are profiteering off of this, not the people who are latching on to what they're saying. Although at some point you do have to be responsible for that decision. Erica and Turning Point USA had been silent about these conspiracies until they addressed them for the very first time last week, when the organization tackled them head-on in a live stream. The organization even invited Candace Owens to join the podcast, the chief profiteer of Charlie's death, via her immediate conspiracies that I very much believe, based off of his loyalties, his recorded loyalties, he would have hated her for promoting. But conveniently and entirely unsurprisingly, Candace Owens said that she could not attend. Now, she can talk about it because she cares so much. She can smear the country that he was openly a huge supporter of with being responsible for his death. Even endanger Charlie's widow by stirring up nut jobs with her made-up theories. And all to make money because she cares so much about what happened to Charlie. But care enough to look his widow that you are doing that to in the eye and to be publicly called on your shit. And suddenly she doesn't care anymore. This week, Erica was adamant that Turning Point USA would not be distracted by these conspiracies from its mission and would continue to do the work that her husband began, saying, I'm not going to sit in a corner and cry and be in a fetal position. This is a duty to my husband, and it's an absolute honor, and I will never back down. And so my message to them is to stop. Now, for the record, Candace Owens said publicly that she would stop promoting these conspiracies about Turning Point USA if Erica Kirk asked her to. And now that Erica Kirk has asked her to, she has welshed like the performative, doe-eyed liar that she is, saying that Erica's request is, quote, an unbelievably emotional response that is absent of any logic, which is a clear distraction tactic on Candace's part. She said that she would stop if asked. She set the terms. She's been asked. She lied. So now, in the hopes that you will not see that she lied, She is trying to distract you into refocusing on whether or not this request meets her arbitrary standards of reasonableness, which has nothing to do with the fact that she promised to stop if asked, reasonable or otherwise. That was an empty promise, like everything else that she says and does. One that she only made to look good, while believing that she would never be called on to live up to it by doing good. Not that someone who patterns her life after Lucifer is capable of doing good. And yes, I am serious. Her life's behavior is a model of Satan's behavior, not Christ's. In the pride that is central to her core identity, she is unbearably jealous of people who are better than she is. And in her jealousy, she makes war on them and deceives the onlookers with cleverly twisted half-truths, all the while misquoting scripture and pretending to be an angel of light. But she is the devil. I got news for you. The real one does not have horns and a tail either. That's what makes them both dangerous. But I said all that I had to say about the fate that I pray to God in his consistent nature he will rain down on her life a few weeks ago. If you've listened to me for long, you know that I am not a Tucker Carlson fan either. But Tucker is just a con man. He would sell his mother, his country, and his soul to the highest bidder, in my opinion. But Candace is a Luciferian snake. And you could see signs of it from the first day she entered the public spotlight. I saw it. I fought against it because I thought it was unreasonable to see it. I fought against it and loyally tried to support her because she seemed to be doing some good for the conservative cause. I am never going to question my instincts that way again. That doesn't mean that they're flawless. But when there's warning signs, there's warning signs. And you should pay attention to those suspicions. So beware. Because when you hug the devil to your bosom, you get bit. And speaking of smiling snakes batting their eyes, as New York City braces for a seismic shift in leadership under the socialist Zoran Mandami, who will take the helm as mayor next month, a wave of controversy is already erupting over his early moves. Many political pundits, particularly those on the right, warned that Mandani would endanger public safety and undermine law enforcement. And now they are already seeing evidence that these claims were entirely correct, even before he has officially taken office. Mandami's transition team has been an explosive topic, given that Mandami has tapped Mysam Lenin to be a key voice on justice reform as a part of the Committee of the Criminal Legal System. Lenin was once a rising hip-hop star, signed to Def Jam, but in 1999 he was convicted of 2 armed robberies where he held up 2 different, hard-working taxi drivers at gunpoint. People who did not have the money that comes along with being signed to a record label. He served 7 years and was paroled in 2006. He then rebranded himself from a rapper to a Black Lives Matter activist and co-founded Until Freedom with Linda Sarsour, who is a controversial pro-Palestine activist who has also served as Mandami's advisor. So to recap, the criminals have been put in charge of crime. That deranged choice and so early on has given New York City's law enforcement apoplexies. I would just remind them that Texas and Florida both want any officers who want out, and affordability is already a dream in those states compared to New York. So anytime that you want to, you can come to work for people who appreciate you, instead of tie your hands and then blame you for the problems that they create with loony policies. Retired NYPD brass, such as John Schell, see a pattern emerging after watching Mandami fill his team with anti-cop firebrands like the black nationalist Lumumba Bandel, the defund the police guru Alex Vital, and others. Mandami says he just wants a broad array of experiences and analysis to draw from. I say quarantine Manhattan, and if the insanity fever doesn't break within a year, push him out to sea before we all catch it. Speaking of insanity, according to the Daily Wire, sanctuary city authorities set a twice-deported illegal immigrant with a rap sheet who allegedly caused a 6-car pileup involving a school bus in Washington state last week, free. According to authorities, the 40-year-old illegal immigrant Juan Hernandez Santos, who should be endangering the schoolchildren in his own country of Mexico, allegedly lost control of his semi-truck, which he was driving illegally, without a license, and jackknifed into traffic in Lacey, Washington last Thursday, sending 4 people to the hospital. This illegal immigrant was being allowed to drive an 18-wheeler, despite already having a lengthy rap sheet of DUIs and other concerning offenses before this latest crash occurred, to crown it all off. The Department of Homeland Security told the Daily Wire that Immigration and Custom Enforcement, ICE, lodged a detainer with local authorities in Washington who ignored their request and set the illegal immigrant free to endanger more American children. The Assistant Secretary for Homeland Security, Tricia McLaughlin, said in a statement, "This dangerous illegal alien has a criminal history, including multiple DUIs, possessing a controlled substance, and 2 prior removals from the U.S. He was a walking public safety threat and illegally was driving an 18-wheeler when he caused a 6-car pileup involving a school bus on the highway in Washington. Thankfully, no children were in the bus. This story could have had a very different, tragic ending." The sanctuary politicians in Washington failed once again to protect American citizens by refusing to honor our ICE arrest detainer. DHS said that Hernandez Santos was first deported from our country in 2005 and again in 2006. He later snuck back into the United States undetected again, invading it unwanted for a 3rd time. The Mexican national was then arrested in 2008 in Los Angeles for driving without a license. That was when he should have been deported again. But he wasn't, because LA is a sanctuary city for other countries' criminals. So 1 month later, he was arrested again for a DUI and a hit and run with property damage, according to DHS. But he wasn't done contributing to our country yet. He was charged with possession of a controlled substance in 2018, before being arrested in 2020 in LA for his 2nd DUI, according to DHS. When he hit a school bus and caused a 6-car pileup, this still entirely illegal immigrant, did not have a commercial driver's license. He did not have insurance or a valid medical card, according to authorities. In a statement, Cameron Watts, a state trooper, said, "In this situation, there is a lot of negligence involved. We actually dispatched some commercial vehicle enforcement officers to the scene to do a full-blown inspection of the truck itself and the paperwork all semi-truck drivers are supposed to have on them." In an attempt to crack down on illegal truck drivers, many of whom cannot even read our English road traffic signs, in an attempt to crack down on that after a string of fatal accidents, ICE has assisted local authorities in several cooperating states to pull over and detain illegal immigrant truckers who are passing through their way stations and endangering those states' populations who did not vote for sanctuary insanity. You want them, you keep them in your districts. Meanwhile, the Department of Transportation is threatening to withhold federal funding to Democrat states that hand out commercial driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. The agency has also instituted much stricter requirements, including mandatory English language training for the obvious safety reasons involved in order to get a commercial driver's license. And speaking of localized pockets of insanity that are costing all of us, according to government data that was shared with the Daily Wire, taxpayers in Pennsylvania are continuing to pay for transgender procedures on children, despite the actions that have been taken to protect them from these life-altering treatments. Yet Pennsylvania's funding for these procedures on minors has continued to surge. From January to September 18th of this year, Pennsylvania has shelled out nearly $3 million in funding for these procedures on kids, according to data that was obtained by the Pennsylvania Family Institute. The numbers on spending came from right-to-know requests that were filed by Dan Bartkowiak with the Pennsylvania Department of Health and Human Services. Dan Bartkowiak is the Chief Strategy Officer at the Pennsylvania Family Institute. Just 10 years ago, in 2015, Pennsylvania's spending on sex reassignment and transition-related services and drugs for children and young adults was $74,000 per year for the whole state. Then those numbers surged to be over $5 million in 2024. In total, since 2015, that one state has spent over $31 million on transgender procedures spread out across 6,229 patients who were between the ages of 5 and 18. Now, even aside from the ages, which are so horrifying that we do not need to address them, that is thousands of tax dollars per patient that could have gone to cancer patients or Alzheimer's or quadriplegics instead of to elective and irreversible cosmetic procedures on vulnerable minors funded by you against your will without you ever voting for any of this. Despite the definitely increasing backlash from lawmakers and parents about the dangers of these procedures, the spending has not actually slowed down. Worst of all, according to the data, there were 133 children last year between the ages of 6 and 12 who received transgender procedures in Pennsylvania. One of the hospitals that has performed transgender procedures on children, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, is currently fighting the Trump administration's efforts to look at the data on how much they use puberty blockers. They sued to block the Justice Department's efforts to investigate the hospital by looking at the data, which just screams we have nothing to hide. Looky here. If we are paying for it, that makes the data ours, not yours. So hand it over. That is not a request. When it comes to this year, from January until September 18th, 2,925,736 in medical assistance. All of that taxpayer money has gone towards these procedures in Pennsylvania through the Children's Health Insurance Program, according to the data that we do have. The amount of CHIP funds that are now going towards these procedures rose from just over $15,000 10 years ago in 2015 to over $1,114,367 in 2024. CHIP is a Pennsylvania program for uninsured kids and teenagers who are not eligible for Medicaid. The Pennsylvania Department of Health and Human Services admitted that it relies on the guidance of the radical World Professional Association for Transgender Health, aka the completely disgraced WPATH, quote, in determining medical necessity for gender-affirming healthcare services. Senator Judy Ward, a Pennsylvania Republican, is attempting to stop taxpayer funding of these procedures in order to protect kids from gender surgeries, cross-sex hormones, and puberty blockers, all of which are damaging. In June, she introduced the Do No Harm Act to shield kids from these procedures, rightly calling it child abuse in every sense of the word. Senator Ward said that she did not believe that her Democrat governor, Josh Shapiro, would sign her legislation, even if it passed the Republican-controlled Senate and managed to get across the finish line in the Democrat-run House. Shapiro himself did not respond to a request from the Daily Wire asking him if he would sign the legislation if it was passed by the state's legislators. Which should not be surprising, because under Governor Shapiro, $14 million has been spent on these procedures. Senator Ward said that more awareness is needed to inform Pennsylvanians of where their hard-earned money is going. As a registered nurse, she added that health professionals were supposed to help people, not push them into experimental treatments, which these by definition are. As the senator said, we are to help people to heal and to be the best person that they can be, physically, mentally, spiritually even. And doing this sort of care is not helping people. I think it's taking advantage of someone who is confused. But the reality is that there is a lot of money to be made in doing that highly despicable thing. But the trans issue continues to affect kids all across the country, even the ones who have managed not to catch this social contagion. And yes, the numbers alone indisputably say that at the very least it is in major part a social contagion. For some states, Just getting men out of women's sports has required them to clear a lot of hurdles. In Colorado, they allow boys who identify as transgender to compete in girls' sports, all in the name of protecting people's sexual identity. Now, I would point out that trans is not a sexual identity, as it has nothing to do with sexual orientation. And biological sex is not an identity. It is a scientific category that is based on scientific realities, meaning that trans is a gender identity, which basically means that it is what you wish you were and how you try to see yourself in order to align with your wishes. Regardless, this indefensible practice of allowing men in little girls' sports could change soon. Colorado School District 49, which is located just outside of Colorado Springs. Hey, I watched Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. We all did, because we all had crushes on Sully. They are leading a coalition of 7 other districts that are all challenging Colorado's harebrained laws. The districts filed a lawsuit in May against the Colorado Civil Rights Division, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, the Colorado Attorney General, and the Colorado High School Activities Association. Last week, the Colorado High School Activities Association settled, which is a major victory for girls' sports. District 49 felt that launching a lawsuit was necessary because it had adopted rules last year that require all of their school sports teams to be divided based on objective biological sex in the name of fairness. And for things to be fair, they have to be based on something that's an objective standard. The superintendent of District 49, Peter Hiltz, said that he made these clear rules based on biology for his school district after he noticed more and more incidents of men trying to compete as women all around the country. District 49 filed their lawsuit on May 9th to protect their district from any penalties that would eventually be brought against them by Colorado's sport governing body. The new settlement takes the Colorado High School Activities Association out of that lawsuit, which remains ongoing in Colorado's federal court. And it gives the 8 districts protection from that one oppressor at least. Superintendent Hilt says that the settlement is a win for common sense. Quote, "We didn't want a state agency to sanction our coaches or our student athletes for advocating privacy, fairness, and dignity. Before the settlement, they would have to self-censor or worry about what would happen if they spoke out about men competing in women's sports. The association could have taken action against coaches. They could have said coaches and athletes were being unsportsmanlike. They could have banned teams from postseason play, and they could have disqualified athletes from championships." Now, the Colorado High School Activities Association told the Daily Wire that it has never penalized a school or district for its policies on this issue, nor has it dictated what those policies should be. A spokesman told the Daily Wire this litigation consumed time and resources without producing any change to how CHSAA operates. The settlement alters nothing about our policies, our practices, or our authority. Now, I would just point out that the fact that they have not ever used the authority does not change the fact that if they have it, it will eventually be used. So, whether or not the lawsuit actually accomplished something is debatable. But the lead attorney representing School District 49, Michael Francisco, told the Daily Wire that he hopes this settlement will encourage other school districts to adopt policies that protect the integrity of sports. Superintendent Hilt continues to hope for an overall victory in federal court against the other agencies we mentioned, saying Colorado law gives precedence to gender identity, but Title IX was designed to give priority to biological sex. We think the state has been overly accommodating of the minority of individuals who want to compete outside their biological sex, instead of protecting the thousands of other athletes. We want the state to protect opportunities for all student athletes. Stop threatening and expecting school districts to defy common sense. He added, common sense is girls should compete against girls, and boys should compete against boys. In other states, there was some really exciting news this week. The Wall Street Journal reported that Iconic Mineral Technologies has recently uncovered what may be one of the most significant critical mineral reserves in the United States, while they were mining clay at Utah's Silicon Ridge. They were originally leasing the land to produce nanosilicon for lithium-ion batteries when the company unexpectedly identified high-grade concentrations of 16 different critical minerals. Independent testing confirmed that the deposit is similar to geological formations in China that supply a major share of the world's rare earths. Because the deposit is shallow, accessible, and located on land that is already permitted and already has extensive infrastructure, Iconic MT says that extraction could begin very quickly. Their CEO, Andre Zeitung, pointed out that this find has far-reaching implications for national security, as these rare minerals are indispensable for advanced semiconductors, electric vehicles, fighter jets, and artificial intelligence hardware. Right now, China produces roughly 70% of the world's rare earths and processes about 90% of them, giving China enormous leverage over global supply chains. It is this strategic vulnerability that has galvanized Marco Rubio as Secretary of State on this issue, as he has argued that the United States must break China's critical mineral industrial monopoly, warning that Beijing's near total control of end-to-end supply chains, mining, refining, and magnet production, poses economic and national security dangers. Secretary Rubio has also spearheaded bipartisan pressure, partnering with Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat from Virginia, and others, urging the White House and the Export-Import Bank to prioritize financing for domestic and allied processing, refining, and metallurgical my tongue is not working today, capacity. Their joint letters emphasized that demand for critical minerals was soaring while the United States remained dangerously dependent on China. They argued that only rapid investment coordinated with allies such as Australia could counter China's dominance. While that remains entirely true, Utah's newly revealed deposit, supported by the state's already diverse critical mineral portfolio, represents not just an industrial opportunity, but a strategic defense asset. But not all of the news on the defense front was good this week. On Thursday, the director of the United States National Counterterrorism Center, Joe Kent, testified to the House Homeland Security Committee that the Biden administration allowed roughly 18,000 known and suspected terrorists into the country. Director Kent revealed that 2,000 of the 18,000 known or suspected terrorists were let into the country as part of the Biden administration's program to bring Afghans to the United States following Biden's botched troop withdrawal from that war-torn country. He also said that the 18,000 terrorists that he is talking about does not include the unknown number of terrorists that the Biden administration released into the country after they had crossed the border illegally. He promised, "We are working right now hand in hand with DHS and with the FBI to run down this 2,000. The Afghans that came here under Operation Allies Welcome, who have ties to terrorist organizations, and additionally the other 16,000 individuals with ties to terrorist organizations that Biden let into our country. That is probably the top terrorist threat that we face right now, and that doesn't include the individuals that came here illegally through the open border. That number, alarmingly, remains unknown at this time. We're trying to figure out who those individuals are as well. The top counterterrorism official then cited how the Biden administration had admitted the Afghan national that is now accused of shooting 2 National Guard soldiers in Washington, D.C. over the Thanksgiving holiday while yelling Allahu Akbar. He said that the Biden administration created a ruse to allow him into the country, pointing out these are individuals who under normal circumstances would never be allowed to enter our country because of their ties to jihadi groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Yet the Biden administration not only let them into the country and in many cases facilitated their entry into the country, just like the entry of the Afghan terrorist who committed the terrorist attack here just before Thanksgiving, killing one of our National Guard members and wounding another. That Afghan was brought into the country as a group of over 100,000 Afghans who were brought here during the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. These individuals, despite what has been reported, were not vetted properly to come into the United States. You know, all I can say is when you let in over 18,000 known and suspected terrorists, 18,000 people who have terrorist ties, making them either terrorists or suspected terrorists, the sheer scale of that makes it impossible to believe that it is anything other than maliciousness. Now, I do not think that everyone who has a different idea from me wants to destroy the country. I don't think that most of the people who have different ideas from me actually want to destroy the country. But I am not naive enough to think that those people don't exist. They're called nihilists. And when you let in 18,000 terrorists, plus however many you let in through a reckless open border, which you refused to shut no matter how much the people were calling for it, I cannot assign any motive to that other than maliciousness. And if you want to argue that it wasn't maliciousness, it was a misguided ideology, then I would say that any ideology that tells you that you have to let in 18,000 violent, crusading killers to slaughter your neighbors that get no say in that decision is a malicious ideology. And I was not the only one addressing the maliciousness out there this week. I've listened to John Hagee on and off since I was a kid. He is one of the few pastors still left out there who does not disguise his personal opinions by wrapping them up and claiming that they are what the Word of God really intends. Nor does he choose to bend and twist the Word of God to suit popular cultural trends or to justify his personal beliefs. He treats the Word of God with respect and keeps it separate from all of those things. He is 100% honest about what it says. And you can take it or leave it. But he does not lie to you about what's in there. This week, in a no-holds-barred attack on the anti-Semitism that has been allowed to permeate certain circles of the American right, including certain so-called Christian circles on the American right. But I would point out that not everything with a cross around its neck is actually Christian, and not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. That's what God gave us discernment for. Pastor John Hagee, who is also the founder and chairman of Christians United for Israel, writing in the Jewish News Syndicate, recalled the time when his daughter, Sandra, warned the House Judiciary Committee nearly 10 years ago, the lessons learned in classrooms today become the policies in the public square tomorrow. Since then, the normalization of Jew hatred in academia that she described has become an all-out war in the public square today. Is it okay to platform bigots unchallenged? Not if you call yourself a Christian. It's just that simple. We have long said in the United States that we stand with God and country, but unfortunately there are many loud voices right now ignoring the former and betraying the latter. In America, Bible-believing Christians must not allow themselves to be deceived into thinking that being a conservative or a Republican or a supporter of the MAGA movement is on the same plane as their faith. It is not. Nothing in this world or the next trumps the Word of God. Today, Adolf Hitler's modern philosophical offspring are following a familiar playbook. They hurl against the Jewish people no less than the charge of killing Christ, sinfully ignoring Jesus himself, who said, quote, "No man takes my life from me. I lay it down willingly." End quote. That is John 10, verse 18. And I would ask, are you so-called Christians calling Jesus a liar? Or at the very least, wrong and misguided, misinformed? You know better? Because a Christian is a little Christ, a follower of Christ. You cannot be a follower of Christ while demanding that he follow you. Returning to Pastor Hagee. As such, anyone who tries to blame any people or group for the death of Christ is merely telling the world that they themselves are not a Christian, for they do not believe in his sacrificial and substitutionary death. Likewise, modern bow-tie-wearing bigots preach variations of replacement theology, which I would point out is refuted by God in Romans 11, among many other passages, effectively claiming that God has turned his back on the Jews. This backwards ideology that the Jews have been replaced in the eyes of God is as false as it is soaked in blood. God is not a promise breaker. Our faith, our world, in fact, our very existence, relies above all else upon the steadfastness of God's word. As such, if you do not believe that the Jewish people have a unique relationship with God, as is written in the word, then you are not a Christian. Then Pastor Hagee got specific. I have many friends who are not Christians, but none bastardize my faith under any circumstances, let alone in pursuit of online exposure, clicks, and cash. To quote the slain conservative activist Charlie Kirk, blaming the Jews for everything is demonic, and it is from the pit of hell and should not be tolerated, end quote. Such people are wicked. Far-right political commentators and podcasters, Nick Fuentes, Steve Bannon, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and their ilk will be called to account for every mind they poison. Preach! For those who follow the Bible, we have faith and know that the exceptionalism of any country, including America, and therefore the inevitable demise of any country, is rooted in the blessing and cursing set forth in Genesis 12:3, by which he is referencing God's promise to Abraham, the father of the Jewish people, from which came Jesus Christ, a Jew, and both the Jewish and Christian faiths. That promise states, quote, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Returning to Pastor Heggie, this is not a platitude. It is a promise seen throughout the Word of God from beginning to end. The Bible promises it, and history has proven it. As I have said for decades, if a line must be drawn, let it be drawn around Christians and Jews together. We are spiritual brethren. The line has been drawn. Now is the time for choosing, end quote. With that beautiful bluntness that rings out with the unmistakable sound of truth, he concluded, every person who claims to share the Christian faith should know you will be reminded by our Father in heaven that what you did for the least of his brethren, the sons of Israel, the Jewish people, you did for me. Matthew 25:40. And lest anyone forget, there is no expiration date on God's unambiguous warning, quote, dare not touch my anointed ones and do my prophets no harm. Psalms 105:15. The inconvenient truth is that the Jewish people did not choose this greatness. God chose it for them. So don't take it out on them. Take it up with God. In the meantime, they will forever remain chosen and cherished. And millions of Bible-believing Christians in America will continue to stand alongside them. Amen. The only thing that I can add to that, in Joshua's words, is, so choose today who you will serve. God and his word with the orders that it contains. Will you defer to him? Or do you choose to follow Conman Carlson, Herr Fuentes, and the devil with the blue dress on Owens? Because no man can serve two masters. This next story will be of particular interest for my fellow Okies. The executive director of a Black Lives Matter chapter in Oklahoma has, like so many other leaders of that scam, been accused of using donated funds towards personal, expensive vacations and rental properties for herself. On Thursday, an unsealed indictment revealed that the Justice Department filed charges last week against the Black Lives Matter executive director for Oklahoma City, Tasheila Sherry Amore Dickinson, for wire fraud and money laundering. According to that indictment, Dickinson embezzled at least $3.15 in donated funds for her personal benefit. According to the indictment, Dickinson allegedly used the donations that were given to her organization to purchase a 2021 Hyundai Palisade, multiple rental properties, food and grocery deliveries, and to fund international vacations. The vacations included trips for her and her associates to the Dominican Republic in July of 2021 and to Jamaica in December of 2021 and January of 2022. She also allegedly spent tens of thousands of dollars shopping at Nordstrom Rack, Macy's, Amazon, Best Buy, and Bob Mills Furniture. But we are not done yet. She also allegedly spent at least 50 grand on food and grocery deliveries, including DoorDash and Instacart, for herself and her children. This alleged fraud all took place between June of 2020, and it continued on up through October 2025, according to the Justice Department. Many of the donations to Black Lives Matter Oklahoma City came through the Alliance for Global Justice, which is a leftist nonprofit that is based in Arizona. They routed funds from other groups like the Community Justice Exchange, Massachusetts Bail Fund, and Minnesota Freedom Fund to Black Lives Matter Oklahoma City, according to the Justice Department. These funds were supposed to go towards the pretrial bail costs for individuals that were arrested in the riots that took place after the overdose death of George Floyd. But Dickinson allegedly submitted false reports to the Alliance for Global Justice about how the money was being used, and then covered up how she was really using those funds. She now faces 20 counts of wire fraud and 5 counts of money laundering. If convicted, she could face decades in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. Why isn't that $3.15 million in fines? That is what she stole. So that should be the fine. Sell everything that she has. Everything. And then she has to work to pay off the rest of it, even if it means working 5 jobs for the rest of her life. That is how fine amounts should be determined. They should be based on how much you stole. And if you do that, guess what? A lot of people won't steal. Not all of them, but a lot of them will not steal. That is what we call an incentive structure, boys and girls. And speaking of incentivizing a very bad future, on Friday, the Democrat governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, signed legislation that allows doctors to prescribe lethal drugs to end the lives of people who are terminally ill and have been given a diagnosis of less than 6 months to live. The bill had been sitting on his desk for over a month after Democrat lawmakers in the state Senate passed the measure in a very close 30-27 vote, appropriately enough, at midnight on Halloween. You can't make this up. Now, I hate to point out the obvious here, but suicide has unfortunately always existed. It did not require legislation to create it. People have been committing suicide without legislation since the beginning of time. So, this is only really about the difference between taking pills in your own home versus taking them in a doctor's office. And the costs of that very minor change in locale are incredibly high. They include corrupting the medical profession so that doctors are no longer people who swear to do no harm ever, and instead they become part-time executioners. Aside from that conflict of interest in good doctors, the incentive structure you've just created attracts deranged serial killers and power-mad sociopaths to the medical profession, which is not what you want. And if you think that's hyperbole, then I would encourage you to go look at some of the cases that have occurred in other countries that have been allowing this for years. Plus, there is the inevitable expansion from terminal patients that have 6 months to live, to terminal patients that have a year to live, to non-terminal patients who have other physical types of suffering, to healthy people that have no physical problems, but they're suffering from mental illnesses, to the people that cause others to suffer by being burdens, like the disabled, the homeless, and other undesirables, myself included in that group as a disabled person. And it eventually even expands to children. I say that based off of the documented track record in Western countries that have been doing this for years. It's not up for dispute. This is what happens. Plus a lot more costs that you can't even begin to imagine if you've not delved into this subject and what has happened in these countries. If you would like to see for yourself where all of the movements that started at this very spot on an unavoidably slippery slope have been forced to end up, please check out the entire episode that I did on the MAID program, Medical Assistance in Dying. It's episode 63, I believe. If not, it's very close to that. It has MAID right in the title. But setting aside where this will go, based on where every other program like it has gone, starting in this very place, just as is right now, this law would bar Christian hospitals from being able to fire their doctors or employees who perform assisted suicide, which is a direct step against the freedom of religion, because those doctors can be employed elsewhere. The Thomas More Society, which previously told the Daily Wire that it would sue to block the law if it was signed, lamented this week's catastrophic news, saying through their executive vice president, "This is a dark and sorrowful day for Illinois, when the state signals that some lives are no longer worth living. The most vulnerable pay the price." He's right. That has been proven. This is a matter of record, a very consistent record. Instead of offering true compassion, support, and care, this law offers a fatal prescription that is not mercy, it is abandonment. The Thomas More Society rightly added, based off of the evidence of the history of these programs in other Western countries, that this law will put the elderly, the disabled, and the vulnerable in our society at risk. And it will jeopardize the religious liberty of Christian doctors, concluding, by legalizing physician-assisted suicide, the land of Lincoln has crossed a profound moral and legal red line. As signed into law, this fatal misstep places vulnerable lives at risk, tramples the inherent dignity of human life, and erodes the foundational conscience rights of medical professionals and religious medical practices. And so Illinois has now become the 12th U.S. state to legalize doctor-assisted suicide, making it the first Midwest state to do so. The head of litigation for the Thomas More Society, Peter Breen, previously told the Daily Wire that there is a significant concern that this is going to turn Illinois into a suicide tourism state, which has happened in the other states that have legalized this. And speaking of news in the field of medicine, a research team from Stanford Medicine has conducted a study that was recently published in the Science Translational Medicine Journal that concludes that mRNA-based COVID vaccines can indeed trigger certain immune cells to produce inflammation of the heart muscle, known as myocarditis, which can be fatal. Dr. Joseph Wu, a senior author of this study and the director of the Stanford Cardiovascular Institute, explained that what happens is not a heart attack in the traditional sense. There is no blockage of blood vessels as found in most common heart attacks. When symptoms are mild and the inflammation hasn't caused structural damage to the heart, we just observe these patients to make sure they recover. But he added that some patients can suffer severe complications, including death. He added that COVID itself can cause myocarditis, and to a lesser extent, so can the mRNA vaccines. The study ultimately found that for reasons that are still unknown, these vaccines are tied to an especially heightened risk in males who are under the age of 30, and particularly those who have received multiple doses in the form of boosters, saying through the Stanford Medicine News Center, vaccine-associated myocarditis occurs in about 1 in every 140,000 vaccines after the first dose, and rises to 1 in 32,000 after the second dose. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. Between the first and second dose, your odds go from 1 in 140,000 to 1 in 32,000. And there's people out there that have been vaccinated like 6 or 7 times. For reasons that aren't clear, incidence peak among male vaccines aged 30 or below at 1 in 16,750 vaccines. Recently, the vaccine chief at the FDA, Dr. Vinay Prasad, proposed in an internal memo that the FDA overhaul how vaccines are evaluated and approved in order to include full randomized clinical trials even for updated or routine vaccines like the flu shot, because as is, these updated versions don't have to be tested that way. And while their predecessors may have been safe, they may not be after the way that they have been changed. These proposed changes would also evaluate the real-world success rates at providing protection based on the number of cases that still occur among vaccinated individuals, instead of just measuring their antibody levels and calling that success whether they get sick or not. The proposed changes would evaluate the rate at which any side effects occur out in the wider population as well, as compared to the rates in very small clinical trials, all of which would provide more information on risk-benefit analysis. One of the reasons for these proposed changes, as cited in the memo, is that at least 10 children have died, quote, after and because of receiving COVID vaccines, even though COVID is mild in children and has been from the very beginning, even when it was deadly for adults. So vaccinating them is not and never was necessary under normal circumstances, meaning the policy of vaccinating kids for COVID for no reason has unnecessarily killed at least 10 of them. The medical establishment was quick to revolt against the idea of using elevated standards to acquire more information, so that all medical questions could be evaluated more thoroughly. No, less information is better, you see. Most especially when there's big money involved. For example, 12 former FDA officials who are probably all working for pharma as we speak because employees go between those two industries like a revolving door, denounced the memo and its proposed changes in an editorial claiming it casts doubt on vaccine safety. Now, my question is, how does investigating vaccine safety by gathering more data cast doubt on vaccine safety unless you already have reasons to assume that that data will show that they are not as safe as you are claiming? Because if the studies show that the vaccines are safe, it would actually increase confidence in vaccine safety, which would be great. But the fact that you're acting like you already know what the studies will show is kind of telling. They also claimed that the new proposed standards reject long-standing science by using data to gather more scientific evidence. That is not what science is about. And they claimed it will slow innovation by keeping the good solutions, weeding out the subpar solutions, and thus creating a need to replace those subpar solutions with better solutions. I don't know, I'm not an expert, but it sounds like that would actually increase innovation and quality. In response to the backlash from the establishment, the press secretary for Health and Human Services, Emily Hillard, told the Daily Wire that the American people deserve evidence-based science. Simple. And said that Dr. Prasad's email lays out a philosophical framework that points us toward that higher standard. So, to sum up, here's my take. I am not going to give anyone vaccine advice. You can love every vaccine out there and get as many of them as you want, and I won't have a word to say to you. Or you can mistrust all vaccines and refuse to get any of them. Or, like me, you can take them on a case-by-case basis. But no matter which of those three groups you fall into, please explain to me what the argument is in favor of having less information to decide which group you want to be in is. So the only advice I'm handing out right now is don't be a tool of people in positions of power with conflicts of interest here. More information can never be a bad thing, and anyone who is telling you that it can clearly has an agenda of their own. And speaking of agendas and the outcomes that each of them produce, this weekend brought a string of terrorist attacks, starting on Saturday afternoon when a shooting at Brown University left 2 people dead and at least 9 more injured after officials at the school alerted students that there was an active shooter near the Barras and Holly Engineering Building. A text alert instructed students to lock doors, silence phones, and stay hidden until further notice. The attack took place during an exam review session for an economics class, and a masked gunman, all in black, burst into the classroom and opened fire. The mayor of Providence, Brett Smiley, gave a press conference Saturday evening confirming the casualties and the other injuries. Initial reports said that the shooter was in custody, but that did not turn out to be the case. Brown University confirmed that there remains a shelter-in-place order. The shooter or shooters still are not in custody at this time. Law enforcement is active in the area. Likewise, the FBI Director Kash Patel issued a statement on X saying that his agency was also on the scene. Then, early the next morning, officials announced that a person of interest had been detained. Colonel Oscar Perez, the chief of the Providence Police Department, did not reveal very many details about that person of interest, but the New York Times reported that the mayor had lifted the standing shelter-in-place order for the university at around the same time. The police chief also confirmed that the person who was detained was in their 30s and that officials were not currently looking for anyone else in connection with the attack. The president of Brown University, Christina Paxson, took some heat on the day of the shooting for not knowing, even a full 6 hours after the shooting occurred, what had been taking place. President Paxton revealed that she'd been in Washington, D.C. when the shooting occurred, and that she had jumped on a flight immediately after the news broke saying that I'm just catching up. But that did not satisfy her critics, who demanded president, with all due respect, 6 hours after the shooting, you don't know what was going on in that classroom? How does that happen? Were they taking an exam? Were they meeting for a club? I don't know, Paxson replied. But the reporter pushed the point, saying, 6 hours later. You're the president. You don't know? I don't know, Paxson repeated. That's kind of concerning, the reporter observed. Meanwhile, the officials at Brown University have canceled all final exams. Instead, they have advised students to go home and take care of themselves, saying, for the moment, we encourage everyone to focus on their own safety and well-being. But Saturday, unfortunately, held even more violence and death, after news broke that 2 U.S. Army soldiers and an American civilian interpreter had been killed by ISIS in Syria. President Trump vowed that the United States would retaliate. In a post, Trump warned the perpetrators that the Syrian government shared the outrage that is currently being felt by the United States, saying, we mourn the loss of 3 great American patriots in Syria, 2 soldiers and 1 civilian interpreter. Likewise, we pray for the 3 injured soldiers, who it has just been confirmed are doing well. This was an ISIS attack against the U.S. and Syria in a very dangerous part of Syria that is not fully controlled by them. The president of Syria, Ahmed al-Sharia, is extremely angry and disturbed by this attack. There will be very serious retaliation. Outside the White House, Trump again promised retribution as he spoke with reporters before leaving for the annual Army-Navy football game, saying, terrible. We still have 3 wounded that seem to be doing pretty well, but we mourn the loss. These are 3 great people and just a terrible thing, adding, we pray for them and their parents and their loved ones. Very, very sad. And we will retaliate. The spokesman for the Pentagon, an Army Ranger veteran, Sean Parnell, shared a few details about the attack while holding back the identities of our fallen heroes in order to allow for their loved ones to be privately notified first. Because after all, no one should get that news by accidentally hearing it on a broadcast. He posted, today in Palmyra, Syria, 2 United States Army soldiers and 1 civilian U.S. interpreter were killed, and 3 were wounded. The attack occurred as the soldiers were conducting a key leader engagement. Their mission was in support of ongoing counter-ISIS, counter-terrorism operations in the region. He added the soldiers' names as well as identifying information about their units are being withheld until 24 hours after the next of kin notification. This attack is currently under active investigation. Then the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, responded by announcing that lethal consequences had already been handed out to those responsible, posting, the savage who perpetrated this attack was killed by partner forces. Let it be known, if you target Americans anywhere in the world, you will spend the rest of your brief, anxious life knowing the United States will hunt you, find you, and ruthlessly kill you. I have nothing to add. Which is probably good, because I have quite a bit to add to our final story. On Sunday, authorities announced that a terrorist attack on a Jewish Hanukkah celebration at Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia, had killed at least 11 human beings and injured at least 29 more. And my friends in Australia are telling me that those numbers are actually much higher. I can't confirm that yet. I'm basing this off of what Americans are being told, so if the tragedy here is actually bigger than I'm reporting, then I apologize. But even based on the numbers that I am reporting, that makes this the deadliest anti-Semitic attack since Hamas massacred Jewish women and children in Israel on October 7th, which was the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. So congrats, Australia. You just took bronze behind Nazi Germany and a self-admitted genocidal terror group. Full disclosure, before we get into more of this story, Australia is my third biggest audience, and, as I said, I have several close friends that I love there. I truly like Australia, and Australians in general. But speaking as someone who likes you, there is a time for tough love, and that time is today. Your leaders have been allowing this to fester at scale in your country. That is the reality here. They have allowed protesters to chant, and I quote, "Gas the Jews" in this very city of Sydney. They have allowed them to attack synagogues and firebomb them. They have allowed bigoted Islamic extremists to post videoed threats online as healthcare workers in your hospitals, in which they say that any Jew that comes in will be killed by them. Not even any Israeli, which would be bad enough, but just anyone who is of Jewish descent. They have allowed the most vile anti-Semitism to go on without stopping it and without even condemning it unequivocally. Any condemnation that they offer is always in some watered down, everybody is to blame and nobody is to blame form of rhetoric, which is first of all blatantly untrue. And second of all, through that, they signal that they actually approve of what is going on by supporting the terrorists who kicked all of this off and pretending to give them a state. One that I would point out is still not a single step closer to actually existing for their pretense, which only proves that their stunt was never about the reality of a state. It was about the signal that it sent. And that signal has been successfully received. This is the result. And while that does not make every good Australian out there responsible for what your very shitty leaders are doing, it is the responsibility of every decent Australian to remember what those elected leaders have done. Remember what they have cultivated in your country to motivate you to get them out of power where they can no longer continue doing this. And by electing people that actually represent you and who you are. Because if this represents who you really are as a people, then I will be proud to have you get mad at me for saying that would make you very bad people. Now, the reality is, I do not believe that that is the case. I believe most of you are good people. And if I am right, And if most of you are good people, and you sit there and allow this to continue to happen, rather than getting off your butt and getting to the ballot box to put an end to it, then that very act does not make you very good people. It would make you no different than the useless, lukewarm people who sat by in Germany instead of doing something, as Jewish businesses were vandalized on the night of broken glass, and then continued to sit by completely passively while concentration camps were built. I promised you a little tough love from a friend, which is more loving than the caresses of an enemy. And if it makes you feel any better, I would absolutely be saying the exact same thing to my own country right now if this had happened here. And I have called out my own country for this repeatedly. So I'm not picking on you. I'm telling you the truth. The latest Exhibit A of what your leaders have been cultivating, this shooting in Sydney, occurred while roughly 2,000 innocent people were gathering to celebrate the first night of Hanukkah. Police admit that this attack deliberately targeted the Jewish community, involved at least 2 gunmen, and included improvised explosive devices that were found nearby. One of these animalistic attackers was thankfully killed, and another is in critical condition and hopefully does not survive, but instead goes to meet his maker for a very warm reception. The attack was caught on video, which shows a very long shootout between the terrorists and law enforcement. One terrorist was taken down by an unarmed civilian as he fired at the Jewish celebration. Bravo for you, sir. That unarmed, ordinary person can then be seen in the video wrestling the gun away from the attacker. Bravo again. So clearly, there are more than lukewarm good people in your country. There are the kind of good people who actually count, the ones who do something rather than sit by and pretend that they have no say in any of this, which is exactly what the people in power want you to believe and try to gaslight you into acting like it's true. Witnesses of what happened described chaos with bodies strewn on the sand, blood everywhere, and wounded victims being carried on surfboards due to a lack of stretchers. The event was packed with hundreds of families and their children, all being fired at by these terrorist bigots. Because yes, when you try to kill someone because of their race, that by definition makes you a bigot. And when you do it to instill fear, to intimidate people in order to gain political power, that makes you a terrorist. That's the definition of those words. The U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, made our position perfectly clear, with no gray area left to misinterpret anything, saying the United States strongly condemns the terrorist attack on Australia targeting a Jewish celebration. Anti-Semitism has no place in this world. Our prayers are with the victims of this horrific attack, the Jewish community, and the people of Australia. The Israeli president, Chaim Herzog, said, At these very moments, our sisters and brothers in Sydney, Australia have been attacked by vile terrorists in a very cruel attack on Jews who went to light the first candle of Hanukkah on Bondi Beach. Our hearts go out to them. The heart of the entire nation of Israel misses a beat at this very moment as we pray for the recovery of the wounded. We pray for them, and we pray for those who lost their lives. In India, Prime Minister Modi reacted as well, saying that they also strongly condemn the ghastly terrorist attack carried out today at Bondi Beach, Australia, targeting people celebrating the first day of the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. On behalf of the people of India, I extend my sincere condolences to the families who lost their loved ones. We stand in solidarity with the people of Australia in this hour of grief. India has zero tolerance towards terrorism and supports the fight against all forms and manifestations of terrorism. Hey, look at that. Clarity from a leader who is responsible to lead clearly. And it's a beautiful thing. Murkiness is not. It is repulsive. And yet, the initial response of Australia's own Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, did not even mention the fact that the victims were Jews and targeted as such, or the completely unimportant fact that this vile terrorist attack on innocent civilians took place at a Hanukkah celebration. Now, no one is surprised by this deliberate signal of indifference and disinterest. Albanese has been a vocal critic of Israel, and he voted against the United States at the UN, all to endorse an anti-Israel resolution that called on them to withdraw from so-called Palestinian territory and abandon their kidnapped remaining hostages. And only because Israel did not cave to him, those same hostages are alive and now back in their homes in Israel today, instead of still starving and being assaulted both physically and sexually in tunnels built with all of our aid money. Australia's opposition leader, Peter Dutton, slammed that decision by the Prime Minister, rightly saying that Albanese sold the Jewish community out for green votes, which is entirely true. As noted, this latest massacre takes place in the middle of a sharp and unaddressed rise in anti-Semitism that has been taking place all across Australia ever since October 7th, starting in Sydney. Jewish communities have faced anti-Semitic chants at rallies of "Gas the Jews," along with other vile expressions of the compassionate people's hearts. Synagogues have been firebombed. Threats against Jews from healthcare workers have been posted online for the world to see. Intimidation has been tolerated on university campuses, and vandalism of the homes of Jewish leaders have all been on the rise in the last 2 years, and nothing is being done about it by the leaders of that country. This is not organic, because all of this started within hours of October 7th, before any reaction of any kind from Israel, when around 1,000 bigoted protesters in Sydney gathered to chant anti-Semitic slogans, including "Gas the Jews." Again, they were chanting this within hours of October 7th, before any reaction, when the only people who had been killed were Jews. the tourists from other country who got caught in the crossfire. Yes, they were basically chanting, "Gas the victims of this," in reference to the Holocaust, and nothing was done. Through their own highly public decisions, the leaders of Australia have strongly signaled their support for this behavior. And all of the rest has predictably followed that. As a result, earlier this month, at the J7 Task Force Summit in Sydney, the Anti-Defamation League reported that anti-Semitic incidents across Australia have surged to nearly 5 times their pre-October 7th levels. That report documented 1,654 incidents over the past year alone, including arson attacks targeting synagogues, Jewish preschools, and other Jewish institutions. Yeah, arson attacks on Jewish preschoolers. That's what your leaders have been allowing. Intelligence reporting has indisputably linked some of these attacks to foreign-backed Islamist networks. And yet the government has been a snail when it comes to assigning any earned blame on the people that are fueling all of this. Among the victims of this mass shooting was Arsen Ostrovsky, a prominent global voice against anti-Semitism who recently moved from Israel to Australia, which apparently put him in even more danger than he was already in back there. In a local interview after the attack, he said, "I saw blood gushing in front of me. I saw people hit. Saw people fall to the ground. My only concern was, where are my kids? Where are my kids? Where's my wife? Where's my family?" It was an absolute bloodbath, blood gushing everywhere. October 7th. That's the last time I saw this. I never thought I would see this in Australia. I lived in Israel the last 13 years. We came here only 2 weeks ago to work with a Jewish community to fight anti-Semitism, to fight this bloodthirsty, ravaging hatred. According to Israel's Channel 12, Rabbi Eli Schlanger, the organizer of the Hanukkah by the Sea event, who was tragically killed in Sunday's terrorist attack, had directly addressed Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in a letter urging him, quote, "As a rabbi in Sydney, I beg you not to betray the Jewish people and not God himself. Jews have been torn from their land again and again by leaders who are now remembered with contempt in the pages of history." That letter was sent after Australia pretended to recognize a still completely non-existent Palestinian state along with the UN General Assembly, which many people at the time, myself included, but I'm talking about people that have an actual voice in this world, pointed out would only incentivize even more terrorism against Jews by rewarding October 7th and the violence of the protests groups that wanted statehood that followed. And here we are, because that's not difficult to predict. The now deceased rabbi pled, "You have an opportunity to stand on the side of truth and justice by rescinding this act of betrayal. You will not only honor the Jewish people and our heritage, but also align yourself with the Word of God. Should you choose this path, you will be welcomed home with open arms and even a warm Shabbat meal. I congratulate you in advance for the courage to do what is right and to stand firmly against this act of heresy. Albanese ignored him, but you don't have to. You can still show that courage and do what is right. And say, no, this will not be tolerated on our soil. Neither will any leaders who allow this to fester without stopping it. No compromises, no nothing, end of discussion. Those are the rules. You can do that. I pray that you do. The final ex-post of Rabbi Schlanger's cut-off life was from last Hanukkah. And it said, the best response to combat anti-Semitism is to display more menorahs, including electric ones on top of cars. He was smiling and dancing in the video. So I encourage all Australians, whether you're Jewish or not, show these terrorists that this is not who you are. Go out and buy a menorah and put it in your window. Show the Jewish community that your leaders may not stand with them, but you do. Since the October 7th terror attacks in Israel in 2023, this is a statement from the rabbis' community, Australian Jewry has been under attack. Multiple synagogues have been burnt and vandalized. Jewish homes and cars have been graffitied with anti-Semitic messages, and massive protests in major cities, including calls for the genocide of Jews and Israel's destruction, have made it dangerous for Jewish people. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused Albanese of betraying Israel and abandoning Australia's Jewish community after Australia recognized a Palestinian state and barred members of Netanyahu's coalition from entering the country of Australia back in August. Prime Minister Netanyahu said history would remember Albanese as a weak politician, but his fate in those pages will be much more severe than that. That's it for me, and I apologize for all the extra blips this week. I've been fighting a pretty bad cold, so I had to keep pausing in order for you not to have to hear all my coughing and carrying on. But I thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please help me build this podcast into a success by clicking the like and follow buttons, because that is what does the trick in making these things successful, and it costs nothing to do it. And I hope that you come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.